Dead America. Tales of the First Month. The Boone Refuge by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Day 0, +13. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in streaks of orange and pink, casting long shadows across the deserted landscape surrounding the Old West theme park. James and Emma moved silently along the outer perimeter fence, their footsteps crunching softly on the gravel path. Each carried a makeshift spear fashioned from rebar, the ends filed to wicked points that glinted in the early morning light. "You know what I miss?" Emma asked, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Miniature golf." James chuckled, his eyes never leaving the fence line as they walked. "Miniature golf? Really? Of all the things to miss about the old world, you pick hitting balls through windmills?" "Don't judge," Emma said with a small smile. There was something satisfying about it. The little pencils, keeping score, the ridiculous obstacles. She sighed. "What about you? What do you miss?" James paused, considering. "Disc golf. Used to play every weekend with my buddies from back home." "I've never played," Emma admitted. "It's like regular golf but with frisbees, and no pretentious dress code." James' expression grew distant for a moment. "Maybe I'll teach you someday, if we ever find some discs." Their conversation halted as movement caught their attention. A figure shambling slowly toward the fence, arms outstretched, mouth open in a silent moan. Its clothes hung in tatters, and patches of skin had sloughed off, revealing the decaying muscle beneath. Without hesitation, Emma stepped forward, positioning her spear between the metal slats of the fence. With practiced precision, she drove the point through the zombie's eye socket. The creature went limp instantly, sliding off her weapon as she pulled it back. "Nice shot," James nodded approvingly. "Thanks. Getting better with practice," Emma replied, wiping the tip of her spear on the grass. "Not that it's much of a challenge anymore. They're getting slower by the day." They continued their patrol, dispatching 3 more zombies with methodical efficiency. The morning routine had become almost mundane, a necessary chore rather than the terrifying life-or-death struggle it had been in the early days. "You notice how sluggish they're getting?" James asked, pulling his spear from the skull of a particularly decomposed corpse. Emma nodded. "Tex thinks it's the muscles breaking down. Says without proper blood flow, their tissue is just deteriorating." "Makes sense. Could be rigor mortis finally setting in too." "Well, whatever it is, I'm not complaining," Emma said. "Slow zombies are better than fast zombies any day of the week." They fell silent as they continued their patrol, the gruesome evidence of their daily routine visible along the fence line. Dozens of bodies lay where they had fallen, a macabre border around their sanctuary. Neither bothered mentioning that they should probably clear the corpses. It was a discussion they'd had before, but the task always seemed less urgent than other needs within the park. They knew the stench would be unbearable when the summer months came, but it was a problem for another day. "Doesn't really matter why they're slowing down," James finally said. "Just glad they are. Gives us a fighting chance." Emma nodded in agreement. 2 weeks ago? I couldn't have imagined we'd last this long." "We're survivors," James replied simply. "We adapt." The two of them continued along their assigned beat path, roughly a half-mile more of fence before their morning rounds were done. They picked up the pace, knowing that a hot breakfast awaited them upon their return. The main street of the theme park was already coming to life when James and Emma returned from their patrol. The quaint, Western-styled buildings, once merely a backdrop for tourist photos, had become their fortress, their home. A handful of survivors moved about with purpose, fetching water, preparing food, reinforcing barricades in the unlikely event there was a breach. Near the saloon, Tex stood in conversation with Melody and Wesley. The former trick shooter had ditched his theatrical cowboy outfit for more practical clothing, though he still wore his signature hat. Melody, dressed in the modified Annie Oakley outfit Wesley had found for her, had her bow slung across her back, never far from reach. Wesley stood close to her, their newfound relationship apparent in his protective stance beside her. Tex spotted them first, raising a hand in greeting. "How's the perimeter looking?" "All quiet," James reported. 4 visitors, all taken care of." "Not even a challenge anymore," Emma added with a slight smile. "That's what I like to hear," Tex replied, clapping James on the shoulder. Gabe's inside, nursing his coffee like it's liquid gold. James rolled his eyes at the mention of Gabe, their reluctant leader by default due to his position as park manager before the world ended. Let me guess, he's got some new reason why we shouldn't do anything proactive today. Wesley chuckled. You've got him pegged. They made their way into the saloon, where the morning meeting had become a daily ritual. The interior had been transformed from a tourist attraction into a functional living space. Tables had been arranged in a circle, and maps of the surrounding area were pinned to the walls. In the corner, a small wood stove provided heat for cooking, a welcome addition scavenged from one of the maintenance buildings. Gabe sat at a table near the center, a steaming mug in his hands and a plate of what passed for breakfast these days in front of him, canned beans and stale bread. He acknowledged their arrival with a nod, but didn't interrupt his meal. Once everyone was settled, James wasted no time getting to the point. We need to start thinking long-term, he began. The processed food won't last forever. Gabe swallowed his mouthful of beans before responding. We've been through this, James. We have enough supplies to last 3 months, maybe more if we're careful. And then what? James challenged. Hope that help magically appears? That the zombies just decide to lie down and die for good? The government will get things under control eventually, Gabe insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. Emma exchanged a glance with James before speaking up. Gabe, we haven't heard a radio broadcast in over a week, and that was from that group at the campground asking if we had anything to trade them. There's been no contact from the government or the military. I think we need to accept that help isn't coming, at least not anytime soon. An uncomfortable silence settled over the group. It was a reality they had all privately acknowledged, but had been reluctant to voice aloud. If we're going to survive beyond our current supplies, James continued, filling the silence, we need to start planting. Now. Planting what? Gabe scoffed. In case you haven't noticed, we're in an amusement park, not a farm. There's open space in the middle of the park, Tex pointed out. Good soil, too. Used to complain about the mud whenever it rained. And we can clear more land if needed, Wesley added. There's plenty of space within the fence line. Gabe shook his head. You're talking about going outside to find seeds and equipment. It's too dangerous. Everything's dangerous now, Melody said quietly. That's just how the world is. James leaned forward, his expression intense. If we can get fall crops in the ground within the next week, we might have a harvest before winter. Potatoes, carrots, hardy greens, things that can withstand the cold. There's a farm just a few miles north of here, Tex said, pointing to a spot on one of the maps. Davis family ran it, organic operation. They'd have seeds, tools, everything we need. I remember that place, Wesley nodded. They used to sell produce at the campus farmers market. Gabe's frown deepened. You want to risk lives for the slim chance that some seeds might grow months from now? We're risking lives by doing nothing, James countered. 3 months goes by faster than you think. Emma stood up, moving to the map. The farm's isolated, rural access road, minimal houses nearby. Low population density means fewer unwelcome guests. It's as safe a bet as we're going to get. I know the layout, Tex added. Spent some time there last spring. The Davis family hosted a shooting competition in their back field. Nice folks. Melody exchanged a look with Wesley before speaking up. I think James is right. We need to start preparing for the long haul. Gabe looked around the table, realizing he was outnumbered. So, what's the plan? Just walk out there and hope for the best? No, James replied. Tex, Emma, and I will go. Small group, in and out. We take the pickup, load it with whatever seeds and tools we can find, and get back before dark. And if the farm is overrun, Gabe challenged, then we turn around and come back, Emma said simply. We're not idiots, Gabe. We're not going to charge into a horde of those creatures for a bag of seeds. Tex nodded in agreement. We scope it out from a distance first. If it looks clear, we go in. Any sign of danger, we bail. Gabe still looked unconvinced. It's not worth the risk. It's absolutely worth the risk, James insisted, his patience wearing thin. Food is literally the thing that will keep us alive. We can't just sit here and wait for our supplies to run out. I'm the manager here, Gabe began. You used to be the manager, James cut him off. Back when this was an amusement park and we were all just employees or visitors, that world is gone, Gabe. We're doing this whether you like it or not." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. No one spoke as the two men stared at each other across the table, the power dynamics of their small community shifting visibly in that moment. Gabe's jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the saloon, letting the bat-wing doors swing closed behind him. "Well," Tex said into the silence that followed, "I reckon that settles it." "We leave in an hour," James declared, looking at Emma and Tex for confirmation. "Pack light, weapons only. We'll need the space for whatever we can salvage." As the group dispersed to prepare for the mission, Emma caught James by the arm, holding him back. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "That was intense with Gabe." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Someone had to say it. We can't keep pretending things will go back to normal if we just wait long enough." "I know," Emma agreed, "but he's still one of us. We need everyone on the same page if we're going to survive." "He'll come around," James said, though he didn't sound entirely convinced. "He has to." Chapter 2. The morning sun had climbed higher in the sky by the time James, Emma, and Tex gathered at the employee entrance on the side of the park. The modest metal door, once used by workers arriving for their shifts, had become their primary access point to the outside world, less visible than the main gate and typically drawing less attention from the wandering dead. James adjusted the makeshift holster on his belt, ensuring his hunting knife was secure. The weight of the spear in his hand had become familiar over the past 2 weeks, its metal shaft cool against his palm. Emma stood beside him, similarly armed with her own spear and a pair of knives strapped to her thighs. "You sure this is enough?" Emma asked, gesturing to their relatively sparse armament. Before James could answer, the heavy thud of boots announced Tex's arrival. Both James and Emma turned, their eyes widening at the sight before them. Tex was loaded for war. 4 6-shooters hung from double holsters on his hips, the well-oiled leather gleaming in the sunlight. His trusted lever-action rifle was slung across his back, and a canvas bag that could only contain ammunition was draped over his shoulder. "Jesus, Tex," James chuckled, shaking his head in disbelief. "Planning on taking on an army?" Tex adjusted his hat, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Just prepared for any eventuality, partner. Figure it's better to have it and not need it than the other way around." Emma eyed the firearms with a mixture of awe and concern. "Won't the noise attract more of them?" "Only if I have to use them," Tex replied, patting one of the revolvers. "Besides, I've hand-loaded all my own ammunition for years. Got enough stored away to last through the apocalypse." He paused, his smile fading slightly. "Which, I reckon, is exactly what we're in." The sound of approaching footsteps drew their attention. Melody and Wesley appeared from around the corner, hand in hand. Melody had her bow slung across her back, a quiver of arrows at her hip. Wesley carried what looked like a modified baseball bat, nails protruding from its business end. "All set?" Melody asked, her eyes bright with anticipation. "I can come along if you need another hand." James shook his head. "I need you here, Melody. You're our second best zombie killer." He cast a respectful glance at Tex. "No offense to anyone else." "None taken," Wesley replied with a grin. "She's a better shot than most of us put together." Melody looked disappointed but nodded her understanding. "What's the real reason?" James sighed, lowering his voice. "I need someone I trust to keep an eye on Gabe. Make sure he doesn't get any ideas while we're gone." "You don't think he'd actually—" Emma began. "I don't know what he'd do," James cut her off, "but I'd rather not find out we're locked out when we come back." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Gabe appeared from the direction of the main street. His demeanor had changed since the confrontation in the saloon. His shoulders were slightly hunched, his expression more subdued. "Hey," he said, the single word carrying a weight of unspoken tension. "Gabe," James acknowledged with a curt nod. An awkward silence hung between them for a moment before Gabe cleared his throat. "So what's the plan? How long do you think you'll be gone?" James studied him for a moment, gauging his sincerity. "If all goes well, we should be back by late afternoon, sunset at the latest." If you run into trouble, Gabe pressed. Then we turn around and head straight back, Emma replied firmly. We're not taking unnecessary risks. Gabe nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I made you a map. It's rough, but it should help. James took the offered paper, unfolding it to reveal a hand-drawn map of the surrounding area. Key landmarks were marked, along with rough estimates of distances. Oma the guest, that older guy with the plaid shirts, he mentioned there's another farm about 3 miles east of the Davis place, Gabe continued. Might be worth checking out if the first one's a bust. Thanks, James said, genuine appreciation in his voice. This helps. Gabe produced a handheld radio next, offering it to Tex. High-powered, should have a range of about 5 miles. Keep us updated. Tex accepted the radio with a nod. Much obliged. The tension between James and Gabe seemed to ease slightly, an unspoken truce forming between them. Gabe might be difficult at times, but beneath his stubbornness lay a genuine concern for the community's well-being. Melody, Wesley, Tex said, turning to the couple, I need you two to head around to the front gate. When I give the signal, make as much noise as you can. Draw those critters toward you and away from the employee lot. A diversion? Wesley nodded. Smart. Just be careful, Emma cautioned. Don't take any risks. The fence will hold them. We'll be fine, Melody assured her, already moving toward the front of the park with Wesley in tow. Just hurry back in one piece. As they disappeared around the corner, James turned back to Gabe. Keep the door open as long as you can. If things go south, we might need to make a quick return. I'll be right here, Gabe promised. Melody and Wesley approached the main gate cautiously, taking stock of the situation outside. The massive metal barrier had stood strong through the first weeks of the apocalypse, turning away hordes of ghouls at times. Through the bars, they had a clear view of the parking lot and the horror it contained. Nearly 100 zombies wandered aimlessly across the cracked asphalt, many clustered within 30 yards of the gate, while others were scattered all the way back to the main road. The creatures showed varying states of decay. Some looked almost human from a distance, while others had deteriorated to the point where skin hung from their frames in rotting sheets. There's so many of them, Wesley whispered, his hand tightening around Melody's. Melody unclipped the radio from her belt, raising it to her lips. Tex, we're in position. I can see at least 100 in the main lot. Can't tell how many might be in the employee area from here. The radio crackled with static before Tex's voice came through. Roger that. Start making noise whenever you're ready. Over. Melody glanced at Wesley, a determined gleam in her eye. Are you ready? He nodded, releasing her hand to grip his nail-studded bat with both hands. Let's give them a show. Melody stepped up to the gate, her bow temporarily forgotten as she wrapped her hands around the metal bars. Taking a deep breath, she began to shake the gate violently, the resulting clang echoing across the parking lot. Hey, she shouted, over here, you rotting bastards. Wesley joined in, using his bat to bang against the metal, creating a cacophony of noise that cut through the morning air. Come and get it, he yelled. Fresh meat right here. The effect was immediate. Dozens of heads turned toward the sound, vacant eyes fixing on the source of the commotion. With eerie synchronicity, the zombies began to shamble toward the gate, their movements slow but relentless. It's working, Wesley observed, continuing to pound his bat against the metal. Melody watched as more zombies emerged from between cars, drawn by the racket. Several shuffled into view from the direction of the employee lot, exactly as they'd hoped. She raised the radio again. Tex, they're moving toward us. Looks like some are coming from your direction too. The path should be clear in about a minute. Good work, came Tex's reply. Keep it up. We're heading out. Back at the employee entrance, Tex pocketed the radio and turned to James and Emma. Looks like our diversion is working. I can see movement heading toward the front of the park. James nodded, tightening his grip on his spear. Emma and I will take point. We move fast, secure the truck, and get out. Tex, cover our backs, but only shoot if absolutely necessary. The noise will just draw more of them. Don't you worry about me, Tex assured him. I know when to shoot and when not to. Gabe pushed the door open, the hinges protesting with a slight squeal. Good luck, he said. I'll keep watch from here. The three stepped out into the employee lot, the bright sunlight momentarily disorienting after the relative dimness of the shaded employee area. James quickly scanned their surroundings, spotting the vehicle they were aiming for, a dark blue four-wheel drive pickup truck parked about 40 yards away. Unfortunately, not all the zombies had been drawn to the front gate. Half a dozen remained in the lot, and they immediately turned at the sound of the opening door. "There," James said, pointing to the nearest one with his spear. "Let's clear a path." Without waiting for a response, he surged forward, closing the distance to the first zombie in seconds. The creature reached for him with decaying hands, its mouth opening in a silent snarl. James planted his feet and drove his spear through its eye socket with practiced precision. The zombie collapsed instantly, and James wrenched his weapon free with a wet, sucking sound. A second creature approached from his left, but James was ready. He whirled, driving the point of his spear through the soft tissue at the base of its skull. This one fell as quickly as the first, lifeless once again. Emma moved with similar efficiency, driving her spear into the head of a female zombie that had once been wearing a flowery sundress. The creature went down, but as it fell, it twisted unexpectedly, wrenching the spear from Emma's grasp. "Damn it," she hissed, drawing the knives from her thighs as two more zombies lurched toward her. She ducked under the grasping arms of the first, coming up behind it and driving one of her knives into the base of its skull. The blade sank in with a sickening crunch, but stuck fast as the zombie collapsed. Emma was forced to release it, left with only one knife as the final zombie closed in. Tex appeared at her side, delivering a powerful kick to the creature's chest that sent it staggering backward. "All yours," he said, with a slight tip of his hat. Emma nodded her thanks, closing the distance to the stunned zombie and driving her remaining knife up through its jaw and into its brain. Dark fluid spilled over her hand as she yanked the blade free. James approached the last standing zombie, a tall, gaunt figure that had once been a middle-aged man. It lurched toward him, arms outstretched, but James was too quick. He thrust his spear forward, the point piercing the creature's forehead and exiting through the back of its skull. With a final gurgle, it slumped to the ground. "Clear," James called, scanning the lot for any movement. "Let's get to the truck before more show up." They jogged across the pavement to the pickup, James taking the driver's seat while Emma slid into the passenger side. Tex climbed into the back, keeping a vigilant eye on their surroundings as James tried the ignition. To their relief, the engine turned over on the first try, rumbling to life with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet lot. "Easy now," Tex cautioned as several more zombies appeared at the far end of the lot, drawn by the noise. "Don't rush and get us stuck." James nodded, letting the engine idle for a moment to warm up. Through the side mirror, he could see more zombies emerging from between parked cars, their pace quickening slightly at the prospect of fresh prey. "I see them," he said calmly, checking the fuel gauge. "Just over half a tank, more than enough for their journey. We'll be long gone before they get here." Emma retrieved her map from her pocket, unfolding it across her lap. "Head straight out to the highway, then north for about 4 miles. The turn for the Davis farm should be on the right." James nodded, putting the truck into drive. The zombies were closing in, but still a good 30 yards away, no immediate threat. He turned the wheel, pointing the vehicle toward the exit. "Here goes nothing," he muttered, pressing down on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, tires squealing slightly on the pavement. To avoid the approaching zombies, James swung wide, driving across a strip of grass that separated the lot from the access road. The truck bounced over the uneven terrain, but the four-wheel drive handled it with ease. In the rearview mirror, James could see the zombies attempting to change direction, their movements clumsy and uncoordinated. Several stumbled and fell, while others continued their mindless pursuit despite the growing distance. The truck picked up speed as it hit the smooth asphalt of the access road, the engine roaring as James pressed the pedal to the floor. Within seconds, they were racing toward the highway, leaving the shambling horde far behind. Chapter 3. The pickup's engine hummed steadily as James guided it along the highway, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Though the road ahead was mostly clear, obstacles appeared with alarming frequency. Abandoned vehicles pulled haphazardly onto the shoulder, debris scattered across the asphalt, and the occasional shambling figure that turned at the sound of their approach. Take it easy, Emma cautioned as James swerved around a flipped sedan. Better to get there in one piece than not at all. James nodded, easing off the accelerator. Force of habit, used to driving like there's somewhere important to be. Nowhere important left to be these days, Tex remarked from the window seat. The landscape rolled by outside their windows, a once picturesque countryside now tainted by signs of catastrophe. Occasionally, they passed cars with figures still trapped inside, their lifeless hands pressing against windows, their vacant eyes following the truck's movement with mindless hunger. They fell into silence as they continued north, each lost in their own thoughts. The normality of driving along a country road created an almost surreal contrast to the apocalyptic reality around them. For a brief moment, it was possible to imagine they were just on a routine supply run, that civilization hadn't collapsed, that the world hadn't ended. That illusion shattered when they rounded a bend and encountered a body sprawled across the center line. "Shit," James muttered, slowing the truck to a crawl. The body lay face down, arms splayed outward as if it had been struck while running. As they drew closer, they noticed subtle movement, fingers twitching against the asphalt, shoulders straining to lift the torso, despite what appeared to be a crushed lower half. "That critter is still moving," Tex observed, leaning forward to get a better look. James brought the truck to a complete stop about 10 feet from the creature. Must have been hit by something big, a semi maybe. The zombie's head turned at the sound of the engine, dead eyes finding them through the windshield. Its jaw worked soundlessly, teeth clicking together in anticipation of a meal it could never reach. "We should put it down," Emma said quietly. "No point leaving it like that." James nodded, putting the truck in park. "I'll do it." "No need," Tex replied, opening his door. "Save your energy." Before either could protest, Tex was out of the vehicle, his rifle at the ready, but after a moment's consideration, he slung it back over his shoulder. No point wasting ammunition on a creature that posed no immediate threat. "What are you doing?" Emma asked as he climbed back in. "No need to waste the bullet," Tex replied. "James, if you wouldn't mind." Understanding dawned on James's face. He released the parking brake and put the truck back in drive, guiding it forward slowly until the front tire was positioned directly beside the zombie's head. "Might want to close your eyes, Emma," James suggested. Emma shook her head. "I've seen worse." James turned the wheel slightly and eased the truck forward. The heavy tire rolled over the zombie's skull, crushing it with a sickening crunch that was audible even inside the cab. James continued forward a few more feet before stopping, glancing in the rearview mirror to confirm the deed was done. "That's that," he said softly, putting the truck back in motion. No one spoke for several minutes as they continued their journey. Finally, Emma broke the silence, pointing to a weathered wooden sign partially hidden by overgrown brush. "There's our turn. Davis Family Farm." James slowed the truck, making the turn onto a narrower road that wound through fields of tall corn. The stalks, which should have been standing proud this time of year, had begun to slump, their green giving way to yellow at the edges. Without proper tending, nature was already reclaiming what humans had cultivated. The driveway to the farm was long and winding, bordered on both sides by the corn. As they approached the main house, a sense of unease settled over them. Several vehicles were parked haphazardly in the yard, a minivan, 2 sedans, and a pickup truck similar to their own. "Looks like people came here for refuge," Emma observed, her voice tight. "Question is, are they still here?" James added, bringing their truck to a stop a cautious distance from the house. The farmhouse stood silent, its white paint peeling in places, its front screen door hanging slightly ajar, windows gaped empty, curtains fluttering in the breeze. On the porch, an overturned rocking chair lay on its side, as if someone had left in a hurry. "I don't like this," Tex muttered, opening his door. "But we didn't come all this way for nothing." They exited the vehicle, weapons at the ready. James and Emma held their spears, while Tex cradled his rifle, finger resting just outside the trigger guard. They approached the house cautiously, moving in a tight formation with Tex taking the lead. As they reached the porch steps, a faint shuffling sound came from inside, followed by the telltale moan they had all come to recognize. Tex motioned for them to hold position as he crept up to one of the front windows, peering inside. What he saw made his jaw tighten. The interior of the house showed clear signs of a struggle. Furniture overturned, dark stains splattered across the floors and walls, personal belongings scattered as if tossed aside in panic. "See anything moving?" James whispered, joining him at the window. Before Tex could answer, a figure shuffled into view inside the house. A woman in a blood-soaked floral dress, her neck bearing a ragged tear where something had ripped out her throat. She moved without purpose, bumping into a coffee table, then changing direction without seeming to notice. James tapped lightly on the glass. The sound was slight, but the reaction was immediate. The zombie's head snapped toward them, cloudy eyes fixing on the window. It lurched forward, hands outstretched, banging against the glass with enough force to make them step back. More movement caught their attention as two more zombies appeared from what looked like a kitchen area, drawn by the commotion. These were men, one in coveralls that might have marked him as a farm worker, the other in a blood-stained button-up shirt. "We could clear them," Emma suggested, readying her spear. "3 isn't too many." Tex shook his head. "I see at least 2 more in the back. And that's just what's visible. House that size could have more hiding." "And for what?" James added. "Seeds wouldn't be kept in the house. We'd be risking our lives for canned goods we don't need yet." Emma conceded the point with a nod. "The barn, then?" They backed away from the house, the zombies inside continuing to press against the window, leaving smears of dark fluid on the glass. Once they were certain the creatures were trapped inside, they turned their attention to a large red barn standing about 50 yards from the main house. "That's more promising," James said, already moving toward it. "If there's farming equipment, that's where it'll be." The barn doors were secured with a simple latch rather than a lock, suggesting the owners hadn't been concerned about theft. James lifted the metal bar carefully, trying to minimize noise. The door swung open with a mild creak, revealing the dim interior. Sunlight streamed through windows near the roof, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The smell hit them immediately, the musty scent of hay combined with the unmistakable odor of decay. "Something dead in here," Tex murmured, raising his rifle. They entered slowly, allowing their eyes to adjust to the dimmer light. The barn was spacious, filled with farming equipment, tools hanging from walls, bags of feed stacked in corners, and, as Tex had suspected, they weren't alone. 2 figures stood motionless near the back wall, their backs to the door. At the sound of the trio's entrance, they turned sluggishly, revealing the gray pallor of death and the vacant stare of the infected. "I've got this," Emma said, stepping forward with her spear raised. The first zombie, a young man in a torn flannel shirt, moved toward her with arms outstretched. Emma sidestepped its grasp and drove her spear through its eye socket with ease. The creature collapsed instantly. The second, an older woman with silver hair and half her face missing, approached James. He dispatched it just as efficiently, his weapon piercing the soft tissue at the base of its skull. It dropped beside its companion, finally at peace. "Clear," James announced after a quick check of the rest of the barn. They spread out, examining the contents of the building. Tex gravitated toward a workbench where tools were laid out neatly, while Emma investigated a series of shelves containing various containers and supplies. "Got something here," Tex called, holding up a red plastic container. "Gasoline, several gallons of it." James nodded appreciatively. "That'll come in handy." "And here," Emma added, gesturing to a collection of hand tools. They continued their search, finding more useful items, work gloves, twine, a couple of handheld seed spreaders, but as minutes stretched into a quarter hour, their initial optimism began to fade. "I don't see any seeds," James said, frustration edging into his voice as he rummaged through a cabinet. "Not even a single packet." "Maybe they stored them somewhere else," Emma suggested, though her tone lacked conviction. "Or maybe they hadn't been delivered yet," Tex offered. "Timing of the outbreak might have interrupted their normal delivery schedule." James slammed the cabinet shut, the sound echoing through the barn. "Damn it," he shouted, his voice reverberating off the walls. The outburst hung in the air for a moment, the sudden silence that followed somehow more deafening than the shout itself. That silence was broken by a new sound, a rustling from outside, accompanied by the unmistakable moan of the dead. "Well, that's not good," Tex muttered, moving to the barn door and peering outside. What he saw made his blood run cold. The cornfield to the side of the barn was moving, stalks swaying and parting as figures shambled between them. The first zombie emerged from the field, followed by another and another. Within seconds, at least a dozen were visible, with more movement suggesting many others were following. "We've got company," Tex announced, backing away from the door. "A lot of it." James and Emma joined him, watching in horror as more zombies stumbled into view, their path cutting directly between the barn and their truck. "Where did they all come from?" Emma whispered. "Must have been wandering in the fields," James replied, mentally calculating their options. "My yell probably drew them out." The number of zombies continued to grow, at least 20 now visible, with more emerging with each passing second. They moved with the same uncoordinated shamble that had become familiar, but their sheer numbers made them a deadly threat. "We need to move," James decided. "Now, before we're completely surrounded." Gathering what portable tools they could carry, they prepared to make their escape. Tex took point, rifle raised as he stepped through the barn door. "Stay close," he instructed, his voice deadly calm. "Head straight for the truck. Don't stop for anything." With a collective deep breath, they burst from the barn, sprinting across the open space toward their vehicle. The zombies immediately changed direction, converging on the moving targets with hungry moans. Halfway to the truck, their path was cut off by a group of zombies that had circled around from the field. Tex skidded to a halt, raised his rifle, and fired in one fluid motion. The crack of the shot split the air, and the nearest zombie's head exploded in a spray of dark matter. He worked the lever action like the trick-shooting maestro that he was, firing again and again as James and Emma pressed forward behind him. 6 shots, 6 zombies down, creating a narrow corridor through the horde. "Go!" Tex shouted, continuing to fire as they ran for the truck. They reached the vehicle just as the creatures closed the gap. Without missing a beat, Tex slung the rifle over his shoulder and drew 2 of his revolvers, firing both simultaneously to keep the approaching zombies at bay. James yanked open the driver's door, while Emma circled to the passenger side. Tex backed up to the door, still firing methodically, each shot finding its mark with uncanny accuracy. "Tex, come on," James called, the engine already roaring to life. With a final pair of shots, Tex holstered one revolver and climbed into the cab, pulling the door shut just as the nearest zombies reached the truck. Hands slapped against the windows, faces pressed against the glass, teeth gnashing hungrily. James threw the truck into reverse, backing up rapidly before spinning the wheel and shifting into drive. The tires spun briefly in the dirt before finding traction, and they shot forward, narrowly missing a cluster of zombies that had approached from the side. They sped down the long driveway, zombies still pursuing but quickly falling behind. When they reached the end, James brought the truck to a stop, looking back at the scene behind them. At least 24 zombies had emerged from the cornfield, with more still appearing. They staggered after the truck, driven by insatiable hunger but hindered by decaying muscles and deteriorating coordination. "That's a whole mess of people," Tex muttered. "Seasonal workers, maybe?" Emma suggested, watching the grotesque parade. "Plus whoever came looking for shelter." "Must have been chaos when the outbreak hit," James added. "Someone probably ran into the fields trying to escape, led the rest of them in there. And they've been wandering in circles ever since," Tex finished, reloading his weapons in a methodical manner. "Until we came along." They sat in silence for a moment, contemplating how quickly their situation had deteriorated. The farm that had held such promise had nearly become their tomb, and they had precious little to show for the risk they'd taken. "So what now?" Emma asked finally. "Head back to the park?" James glanced at the map Gabe had given them, his finger tracing the route to the second farm marked on the paper. "We're already out here," he said slowly. "Might as well check the other place." "You sure that's wise?" Tex asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. James looked back at the zombies still pursuing them, now small figures in the distance. Then he turned his gaze to the empty road ahead, weighing their options. "No," he admitted, "but what choice do we have? We came for seeds, and we're not going back empty-handed." He folded the map and put the truck in gear. "Let's go see what the second farm has to offer." Chapter 4. "Should be just up ahead," Emma said, studying the hand-drawn map. "Second driveway on the left after the creek crossing." James slowed as they approached a small bridge spanning a creek bed. Water still flowed beneath, one of the few things in the world that seemed unaffected by humanity's collapse. Nature, it seemed, would continue with or without them. "You know," Tex mused from the window seat, "my granddaddy used to say that if you want to survive the end of the world, stick close to fresh water." "Smart man," James replied. "Too bad we're heading away from it." "Can't grow crops without water," Emma pointed out, "but we've got the lake in the park. Once we get the seeds, we should be in good shape." The truck rumbled over the bridge and continued down the road. Moments later, a weathered mailbox came into view, the name Jenkins barely visible on its side. James turned onto the driveway, which wound through a meadow before disappearing into a stand of trees. "Keep your eyes open," he cautioned as they entered the wooded area. "Don't want any surprises." The trees gave way to open farmland, and immediately they could see that something was wrong. The farmhouse ahead was largely destroyed, its roof collapsed, walls blackened by fire. Smoke no longer rose from the ruins, suggesting the blaze had died out days ago. "Jesus," Emma murmured. The fields around the house didn't look much better. Half the crops were burned to stubble, while the remainder appeared withered and neglected. A barn stood about 100 yards from the house, its red paint faded but the structure intact. It looked untouched by the fire that had claimed the house. "Worth checking out?" Emma asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. James nodded, bringing the truck to a stop a cautious distance from the barn. "Let's go, but stay alert." They exited the vehicle with weapons ready, James and Emma with their spears, Tex with his rifle at the ready. They approached the barn slowly, spreading out slightly to avoid presenting a clustered target. They were halfway to the structure when the shot rang out. Dirt exploded at their feet, the crack of the rifle reaching their ears a split second later. "Down!" Tex shouted, dropping to one knee and raising his own rifle in one fluid motion. James and Emma dove for cover behind a wooden cart that sat abandoned nearby. Tex remained in the open but had already located the threat, a figure in the loft of the barn, visible through an open window. "He's in the loft," Tex called, his voice calm despite the danger. "Middle window." "We're not here to hurt anyone," James shouted toward the barn. "We're just looking for supplies." The response was immediate. "That's what the last group said before they tried to burn me out," a gruff voice called back. "I've got enough ammo to put all three of you down, so back off." "Look, we don't want trouble," James tried again. "We're from the old theme park down south. We're just trying to find seeds for planting." There was a pause, then, "Theme park? You folks holed up in that western place?" "That's right," James confirmed. "We've got women and children there. We're just trying to survive." Another pause, longer this time. "Show me your hands and stand up slowly," the voice finally demanded. "All of you." James glanced at Emma, who nodded reluctantly. "Tex," he called. "I hear him," Tex replied, though he didn't lower his rifle immediately. "Don't like giving up my weapon, though, but it's your call." James took a deep breath. "We're putting our weapons down and standing up," he shouted toward the barn. "Please don't shoot." Slowly they placed their weapons on the ground and raised their hands, standing exposed in the open field. The figure in the loft remained motionless, rifle still aimed in their direction. "That's far enough," the voice called. "What's your name?" "I'm James, this is Emma and Tex." After a tense moment, the rifle barrel lifted away from them. "Wait there," the voice instructed. Minutes later, a middle-aged man emerged from the side door of the barn. He wore dirty overalls and a flannel shirt, his face weathered by years of outdoor work. His gray, streaked beard was untrimmed, and his eyes carried the weary vigilance of someone who had seen too much. The rifle in his hands was pointed down, but his finger remained near the trigger. "Sorry about the welcome," he said, approaching cautiously. "Can't be too careful these days." "No harm done," James replied, though none of them lowered their hands. "Mind if we pick up our weapons? We've already been attacked once today." The farmer studied them for a moment, then nodded. Slowly. As they reclaimed their spears and rifle, the farmer introduced himself. Name's Jenkins, Frank Jenkins. This is, or was, my farm. What happened? Emma asked, gesturing toward the burned house. Jenkins's face darkened. Those things happened. About 5 days ago, a whole bunch of them came wandering up the road, dozens of them. They surrounded the house, started breaking windows, trying to get in. He paused, the memory clearly painful. I fought them off as best I could, but there were too many. Got pushed back to the kitchen, and I had to make a choice. You burned it down, James finished for him, with them inside. Jenkins nodded grimly, grabbed what I could carry, and slipped out the back door. Set the place ablaze. Figured I'd have a better chance of making it if they weren't around to harass me. He glanced back at the ruins. Worked, too. Most of them burned up in there. Your family? Emma asked gently. The question seemed to hit Jenkins like a physical blow. He looked away, his jaw clenching. Wife and kids were up north, visiting her parents in Michigan. His voice grew quiet. I don't have a way to know if they're all right. Phone lines went down about the same time everything went to hell. I'm sorry, Emma said. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group, broken only by the distant call of a bird somewhere in the trees. Listen, James finally said. We've got room back at the park. It's secure, walls all around. You'd be welcome to join us. Jenkins considered this for a moment, then shook his head. Appreciate the offer, but I'm staying put. Got the barn set up just how I like it. Plenty of preserves I managed to save from the kitchen. Much to my surprise, it didn't burn as bad as the rest. He gestured toward the loft. And I've got a good defensive position up there. One way in, easy to defend. It's not safe out here alone, Emma protested. Those things are everywhere. No offense, miss, but nowhere's really safe anymore, Jenkins replied. And I don't much fancy the idea of being locked up with a bunch of strangers, even if it does have walls. Rather take my chances on my own land. Well, the offer stands if you change your mind, James said. But right now, we're looking for seeds, fall crops if possible, trying to get something in the ground before it's too late. Jenkins' expression shifted to one of surprise. Seeds? You folks planning that far ahead? Have to. Tex spoke up. World ain't fixing itself anytime soon. We haven't heard any emergency broadcasts in over a week, Emma added. Last radio station went silent 4 days ago. It's like everything's just stopped. Jenkins absorbed this information, his weathered face growing more somber. You really think it's that bad? That this isn't just temporary? We don't know, James admitted, but we have to plan like it's not going to get better, at least not soon enough to matter. The farmer was quiet for a long moment, seemingly wrestling with the implications. Then he shook his head as if physically clearing away the darker thoughts. Well, if I had seeds to give you, I would, but the delivery was supposed to happen this week. Every farmer in the county gets their shipment around the same time. That explains why the Davis place didn't have any either, Tex observed. Yeah, old Tom would have been waiting on the same delivery, Jenkins confirmed. Sorry, I can't help you more. It's all right, James said, though disappointment was evident in his voice. Thanks for not shooting us, at least. Jenkins actually cracked a smile at that, days still young. The unexpected humor broke some of the tension, and Emma found herself smiling despite the circumstances. Listen, James said, we've got a radio back at the park. We monitor Channel 8 throughout the day. If you ever need to reach out, or if you change your mind about joining us. Appreciate that, Jenkins nodded. Hang on a second. He disappeared into the barn, returning moments later with several glass jars in his arms. Here, he said, offering them to Emma. Strawberry preserves from last season. My wife's recipe. We can't take your food, Emma protested. Sure you can, Jenkins insisted. I've got plenty more. And sounds like you're out here risking your butts to feed your community, so you deserve a little something special. Emma accepted the jars with a grateful nod. Thank you. One more thing, Jenkins added. If you folks get caught outside after dark and need a place, my barn's open to you. Safer than being out on the road at night. That's mighty generous, Tex said, tipping his hat slightly. The farmer seemed to hesitate, then asked, You haven't seen anyone else out this way, have you? Group of men, 5 or 6 of them, led by a fellow with a scar across his cheek? James shook his head. No. Friends of yours? The opposite, Jenkins replied, his expression hardening. They're the ones who tried to burn me out before the dead showed up, wanted my supplies, just... If you see them, be careful. We will, James promised. They said their goodbyes, and Jenkins retreated to his barn, securing the heavy door behind him. The trio made their way back to the truck, the jars of preserves tucked carefully in a bag Emma carried. So, that's it? Tex asked as they reached the vehicle. Back to the park empty-handed? James leaned against the truck's hood, frustration evident in his posture. I don't know. We can try another farm, but if they're all waiting on the same delivery... Wait, Emma said suddenly, her eyes lighting up. I can't believe I didn't think of this before. The university. James and Tex exchanged confused glances. What about it? James asked. The agriculture department, Emma explained, her words coming faster with excitement. They have a huge greenhouse program. I took a botany elective last semester, and they showed us their seed bank. They store hundreds of varieties for research. You think they'd have what we need? Tex asked. Absolutely, Emma nodded. Fall crops, spring crops, exotic varieties, they have everything, and it's all labeled and organized. James considered this, clearly weighing the potential against the risk. The university's in the middle of town, could be overrun. Not exactly, Emma countered. The agriculture building is on the outskirts of campus near the experimental fields. It's only a few blocks from the edge of town. We could approach from the rural side, avoid the main roads completely. Still be dangerous, Tex pointed out. Campus was packed with people when this all started. Lot of potential for those critters. Everything's dangerous now, Emma echoed Melody's words from earlier that morning. But we know exactly where to look, and it's our best shot at getting what we need. James straightened up. Decision made. All right, let's do it. You sure about this? Tex asked. No, James admitted. But Emma's right. It's our best option, and we've come too far to go back empty-handed. They climbed back into the truck, the atmosphere tense with anticipation of what lay ahead. James started the engine, the familiar rumble providing a small comfort in the increasingly unfamiliar world. How far to the university? He asked as he turned the truck around. About 15 miles, Emma replied. If we take the back roads, we should be able to avoid the worst of it. Tex checked his weapons methodically, reloading the rifle he'd used at the Davis farm. Better get a move on then. Don't want to be out there when the sun goes down. The truck rolled down the driveway, leaving Jenkins's farm behind. In the side mirror, James could see the farmer watching from the loft window. Everyone ready? He asked, glancing at his companions. Emma nodded, her expression determined despite the fear evident in her eyes. Tex simply patted his rifle and gave a grim smile. Then let's go get those seeds. Chapter 5. The truck rolled to a stop at the end of a quiet suburban street. Small, identical houses lined both sides of the road, their neat lawns now overgrown, their driveways mostly empty. From this vantage point, they could see barbed wire fencing in the distance, marking the boundary of the university property. This is it, Emma said, her voice hushed despite the closed windows of the truck. The agriculture fields start just beyond those houses. James killed the engine, the sudden silence pressing in around them. Through the windshield, they could see evidence that the neighborhood hadn't been spared during the apocalypse. A mailbox knocked over, a bicycle abandoned in the middle of the street, a front door hanging open. Not many of them around, Tex observed, scanning the area, at least not that I can see. It was true. Only a handful of figures shambled aimlessly through the yards or along the sidewalks, their movements sluggish. A few more could be seen through windows, pressing against the glass from inside homes, trapped by doors they no longer had the coordination to operate. Most of the cars are gone, Emma noted. People must have fled. But to where? James wondered aloud. Deeper into the mountains, probably, Tex suggested. Away from people. Smart move, if they got out early enough. They sat in silence for a moment, absorbing the eerie calm of the once vibrant neighborhood. Finally, James released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. All right, here's the plan. We move quietly through this neighborhood to the fields beyond. Emma leads since she knows where we're going. I'll take the middle, Tex on R6. We take down any of those things we need to, but only if they're directly in our path. No unnecessary risks." "And once we're inside?" Emma asked. "Get what we came for and get out," James replied simply, quick and quiet. With nods of agreement, they exited the vehicle. The familiar weight of their weapons, James and Emma with their spears, Tex with his rifle slung across his back and revolvers at his hips, provided a small measure of comfort. They moved in formation down the street, alert for any movement. A lone zombie emerged from between two houses at the far end of the block, its vacant eyes fixing on them instantly, shambling to meet them in the street. Without breaking stride, Emma stepped forward, dispatching it with a precise thrust of her spear. The creature collapsed silently, and they continued on. "Down," James whispered suddenly, dropping into a crouch. Emma and Tex followed suit, huddling behind an abandoned car. 3 zombies shuffled into view ahead, moving across the street with no apparent destination. They waited, frozen in place, until the creatures had passed. As they approached the edge of the neighborhood, the outer edges of the university came into focus. The barbed wire fence loomed before them, beyond which stretched open fields dotted with smaller fenced plots. "There's our target," Emma said, pointing to a large brick building several hundred yards in the distance. "The Agricultural Sciences building. That's where they store everything." The space between them and their destination was mostly open, offering minimal cover but good visibility. Scattered across the expanse, perhaps 24 zombies wandered aimlessly among the experimental crop fields. "Not too bad," James assessed. "Most of them are spread out enough that we can avoid them. Couple of them between us and the building, though," Tex pointed out. "We'll have to take those down." James nodded. "Let Emma and I handle it. Don't want to let everybody know we're here unless we absolutely have to." Tex knelt to create a gap beneath the barbed wire, lifting it carefully while James and Emma slid underneath. Once they were through, Tex followed, wincing slightly as a barb caught and tore his shirt sleeve. "You good?" James asked. "Just a scratch," Tex affirmed, checking to make sure the barb hadn't pierced his skin. They moved across the field in a half-crouch, using what was left of the rows of what had once been experimental crops as minimal cover. Most of the plants had withered due to lack of care, but some hardier varieties still struggled toward the sun. The rich smell of earth and vegetation was a stark contrast to the death that surrounded them. As they approached the halfway point to the building, a zombie in coveralls, perhaps once a groundskeeper or researcher, spotted them. It changed direction immediately, lurching toward them with outstretched arms. "I've got it," James said, moving to intercept. The zombie quickened its pace as James approached, but it was no match for his spear. The metal point drove through its eye socket with ease, and it dropped without a sound. James wrenched his weapon free, grimacing at the dark fluid that coated the tip. They continued forward, encountering and dispatching 2 more zombies that stood directly in their path. Emma's movements had become fluid with practice, her technique nearly as efficient as James's. The agriculture building loomed closer, its windows dark and uninviting. "Almost there," Emma whispered encouragingly. They reached the side of the building without further incident, pressing their backs against the brick wall as they caught their breath. James peered through the nearest window, cupping his hands around his eyes to block the glare. "Can't see much," he reported. "No lights inside." "Power's been out for days," Emma reminded him. "We'll need to be careful in there." "See any movement?" Tex asked. James shook his head. "Nothing obvious, but that doesn't mean it's empty." They moved along the wall until they found a classroom window that was partially ajar. James tested it, finding that it slid open with minimal resistance. "This'll work," he said. "Tex, you want to go first with that rifle?" "Happy to," Tex replied, slinging his weapon around to a ready position. With James's help, Tex hoisted himself through the window, landing softly on the other side. After a tense moment, his whispered "clear" prompted Emma and James to follow. The classroom they entered was neat and orderly, suggesting it hadn't seen much action when the world ended. Rows of desks faced a whiteboard, a half-erased lecture still visible on its surface. Posters detailing plant biology decorated the walls, incongruously normal in their academic simplicity. As James's feet hit the floor, his boot knocked over a trash can, the metallic clang echoing through the silent building. They froze, listening intently. At first, nothing. Then, faintly, the sound of shuffling feet and low moans responded to the noise. "They heard us," Emma whispered, her face paling. "Where's the seed storage?" James asked urgently. "Second floor," Emma replied, "north wing." "Then let's move," Tex said. "Those things outside are probably heading this way too." They slipped into the hallway, which stretched in both directions. The emergency exit signs, designed to function even during power outages, cast an eerie green glow that did little to illuminate their path. The sound of moaning grew louder from the far end of the corridor. "This way," Emma directed, pointing in the opposite direction from the sounds. They moved quickly but cautiously, checking doorways as they passed. Most rooms were locked or empty, but occasionally they glimpsed furniture overturned or blood splattered across walls, evidence of the violence that had erupted when the infection reached the campus. "Stairwell should be around the next corner," Emma whispered as they approached a junction in the hallway. James peered around the corner, then immediately pulled back, raising a hand to halt the others. "We've got a problem," he hissed. "How many?" Tex asked, already reaching for his revolvers. "At least a dozen, clustered around what looks like the main entrance," James reported. "Haven't seen us yet." "We need to find another way up," Emma said, her mind racing. "There should be another stairwell on the opposite side." They backtracked, attempting to circle around to the other end of the building, but as they rounded another corner, they found themselves face to face with a group of zombies shambling down the hallway toward them, clearly drawn by the noise of their entry. "Back," James ordered, but it was too late. The creatures had spotted them, their moans growing louder as they quickened their pace. Tex stepped forward, his rifle raised. "No point in being quiet now," he said with a smirk. The crack of his first shot echoed through the hallway, the bullet finding its mark in the forehead of the lead zombie. He worked the lever action with practiced efficiency, firing again and again. Each shot dropped another creature, but the noise only drew more from elsewhere in the building. "There's too many!" Emma shouted as more zombies appeared behind the first group. "Stairwell," James pointed to a door marked with an exit sign. "Go!" They sprinted for the stairs, Tex taking up the rear, still firing methodically. They burst through the door to find a concrete stairwell, its walls stained with old blood. The door wouldn't close properly, its latch damaged or broken. "Up," James ordered, taking the stairs two at a time. Emma led the way to the second floor, Tex close behind her, with James bringing up the rear. As they reached the landing, James glanced back to see the first zombies pushing through the broken door below. They emerged into another hallway, this one quieter than the first, but the respite was brief. From around a corner ahead came the familiar sound of shuffling feet and hungry moans. "They're everywhere," Emma whispered, despair creeping into her voice. Tex stepped past her, drawing a revolver from his holsters. "Not for long," he said, a deadly calm in his voice. As the first zombies appeared, Tex raised the revolver, his movements a blur as he fanned the hammer with his palm. The deafening barrage of shots dropped the creatures in rapid succession, each bullet finding its mark with uncanny precision. "Go," he shouted over the gunfire. "I'll hold them here." James grabbed Emma's arm, pulling her down the hallway past Tex. They ran until they reached a heavy door marked Laboratory 214. James tried the handle. Locked. "Stand back," he instructed before ramming his shoulder against the door. The lock gave way with a crack of splintering wood, and they stumbled into the room. Tex backed in moments later, still firing until he crossed the threshold. James slammed the door shut behind him, dragging a heavy desk across the floor to barricade it. "That won't hold them for long," Tex warned, reloading his weapons with practiced motions. "Won't have to," Emma replied, turning to survey the room. "We're here." The laboratory was spacious, with long tables covered in scientific equipment. But what caught their attention was the far wall, entirely covered with small metal drawers, each labeled with meticulous care. "The seed bank," Emma breathed, relief washing over her face. James approached the wall, reading some of the labels. They are organized by species. This is perfect. Fall crops would be what? Spinach, carrots, beets? Tex asked, keeping one eye on the barricaded door, which already shuddered under the weight of zombies pressing against it from the other side. And lettuce, kale, radishes, Emma added, already pulling open drawers and removing small packets. We need to gather as much as we can. They worked quickly, Emma directing them to the most important varieties. James found a canvas bag hanging from a coat rack and began filling it with seed packets. We need to think about spring, too, Emma advised. Tomatoes, peppers, beans, they take longer to grow, but they'll produce more food. The pounding on the door grew more insistent, the desk beginning to slide across the floor as the combined strength of multiple zombies slowly overcame the barricade. We're running out of time, Tex warned, his revolvers ready. James looked from the partially filled bag to the door and back again. We've got what we came for, he declared. Now we just need to figure out how to get out of here. Emma clutched the bag of seeds to her chest, her eyes meeting James's. What now? She asked, voicing the question that hung heavily in the air. The desk slid another inch across the floor, the wood of the door beginning to splinter under the relentless pressure from the other side. Chapter 6. The early afternoon sun cast its beams down onto the rooftop of Dormitory Hall B, bathing the concrete surface in golden light. Brandon and Deborah sat cross-legged near the edge, a makeshift picnic spread between them, prepackaged chips and cold cups of ramen noodles, prepared using a bottle of water to soften it up. It was, Brandon thought, almost romantic, in a post-apocalyptic sort of way. The world below them might be filled with walking corpses, but up here, with the gentle breeze and Deborah's smile, he could almost forget. Penny for your thoughts, Deborah said, breaking into his reverie. Brandon smiled, leaning back on his elbows, just thinking about how normal this feels. You, me, a picnic. If you squint hard enough, you can almost pretend nothing's changed. Except for the gourmet meal, Deborah quipped, holding up a forkful of instant ramen. 5-star dining at its finest. Hey, I'll have you know this is a delicacy now, Bryn replied with a laugh. The zombie apocalypse special. They ate in companionable silence for a few moments, enjoying the simple pleasure of food and company. The view from the rooftop stretched for miles, revealing the small college town nestled among the mountains, its streets empty of human life, but dotted with numerous shuffling figures. Where would you go? Deborah asked suddenly. If all this cleared up tomorrow, and you could go anywhere in the world, where would you want to vacation? Brandon considered the question, rolling it around in his mind. Hawaii, he decided, always wanted to go there. White sand beaches, crystal clear water, those little drinks with the umbrellas. No way. Deborah's eyes widened. That's exactly what I was going to say. Great minds, Brandon grinned. Though to be fair, after all this, I think most people would pick a tropical paradise over, say, a crowded city. That's true, Deborah nodded, her smile fading slightly. Do you think it will clear up, eventually? The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither wanted to fully confront. Before Brandon could formulate an answer, the heavy thud of footsteps announced another presence on the roof. Aiden appeared from the access hatch, a small package clutched in his hand. His athletic build had thinned slightly over the past 2 weeks, but he still moved with the easy confidence that had made him stand out on campus before everything changed. Don't tell me you two are having a romantic date without dessert, he called out, tossing a package of snack cakes in their direction. Brandon caught it with one hand, examining the slightly crushed package with exaggerated reverence. Cosmic brownies? Man, you really know how to treat a lady right. What can I say? I'm a gentleman, Aiden replied with a mock bow. Deborah opened the package, breaking one of the chocolate treats in half and offering a piece to Brandon. You're spoiling us, Aiden. Enjoy it while it lasts, Aiden said, his tone shifting as he moved to the edge of the roof, looking down at the streets below. Found them in the back of the vending machine, probably the last ones in the building. Brandon and Deborah joined him at the edge, their mood sobering as they took in the scene below. The main street that ran alongside the dormitory was teeming with zombies, perhaps 200 or more clustered around the entrance to the quad. From this height they looked almost like ants, moving in strange, purposeless patterns. More than yesterday, Brandon observed quietly. It seems like they're drawn to the sound, Aiden replied. One of them moans, drawing a couple more over to them. Then they all moan and more of their friends come over to see what they're moaning about. The three fell silent, shaking their heads at the thought while watching the shambling horde below. So, Aiden said, clearly trying to lighten the mood. Hawaii, huh? I overheard that part. Personally, I'd go for the Bahamas. Less tourists. Oh, because that's going to be a big concern post-apocalypse, Deborah laughed. Hey, you never know. Maybe the zombies will develop a taste for tourism, brains, and a complimentary continental breakfast, Aiden moaned, doing his best zombie impression. Their laughter was cut short by the sharp crack of gunfire, distant but unmistakable. All three froze, heads turning in the direction of the sound. What in the hell was that? Brandon asked. Sounded like gunshots, Deborah added. That came from inside a building, Aiden said, his brow furrowing. Sounds muffled. Another shot rang out, followed by several more in rapid succession. The three of them listened intently, finally getting a read on where they were coming from. Direction of the agriculture building, maybe, Brandon said, pointing toward the northern edge of campus. Deborah nodded in agreement. That's my guess. If I was trying to get onto campus, I'd head across the fields too, rather than come up Main Street. So what do we do? Aiden asked, his voice revealing he already knew the answer. We have to let them know that we're here, Brandon replied, already moving toward the roof access door. Come on. They descended the ladder quickly, emerging into the 10th floor cafeteria that had become their communal living space. About a dozen other students were gathered there, their faces turning toward the newcomers with expressions of curiosity and concern. What's happening? George asked, rising from his chair near the barricaded door. As the designated dorm manager before the world ended, he had naturally assumed a leadership role among the survivors. We heard shots. Someone's at the agriculture building, or one close to it, Brandon reported. There's gunfire, multiple shots. The news sent a ripple of excitement through the group. Seth, a thin young man with glasses who had been rescued from his 7th floor room nearly 2 weeks ago, stepped forward eagerly. Do you think it's the military coming to evacuate us? He asked, hope shining in his eyes. George seized on the idea immediately. Has to be. They'd start clearing the outlying campus buildings first, work their way inward, standard protocol. I don't think so, Aiden countered, shaking his head. No air support, no vehicles that we can hear, and it only sounds like a couple of guns. Could be a reconnaissance team, George insisted. Advanced scouts before they bring in the heavy equipment. Brandon exchanged a glance with Aiden, skepticism evident in both their expressions. Either way, Brandon said, someone's out there. So what do we do? Seth asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. A moment of silence fell over the group as they considered their options. It was Aiden who finally spoke up. We go to them, he declared. Let them know we're here, that we need help. That's insane, George protested immediately. The streets are crawling with those things. You'd never make it. There's only one way to find out for sure, Brandon countered. It's too dangerous, George insisted, his voice rising. We've been safe here because we've stayed put. The moment we leave this building, we're at risk. And how long can we stay here? Aiden challenged. Our food supplies are running low. We haven't heard from anyone in 2 weeks. If these people are facing that much resistance, they might abandon campus and not come back for a long time, longer than we can last on what we have. The debate intensified, voices overlapping as everyone tried to weigh in. Finally, Brandon raised his voice above the others, commanding attention. We need help, Brandon stated firmly, and this might be our only chance to get it. It's suicide, George shot back. You don't even know who these people are or if they'd help us. We don't know that they won't either, Aiden argued, but we do know that if we sit here and do nothing, eventually we starve. The argument might have continued indefinitely if not for Deborah. She had slipped away during the debate, returning now with 2 heavy wooden chair legs, their ends sharpened to crude but effective points. Without a word, she handed one to Brandon and the other to Aiden. Be careful, she told Brandon, leading in to press a kiss to his lips. Come back to me in one piece. The simple gesture silenced the room. George opened his mouth as if to continue his protest, then closed it again, recognizing that the decision had been made. "Just be smart about it," he finally said, his anger deflating. "Don't take unnecessary risks." Brandon nodded, gripping the makeshift weapon tightly. "We'll be back with help," he promised, though whether he truly believed it was another matter. The other students moved quickly to dismantle the barricade in front of the stairwell door, dragging furniture aside to clear a path. As they worked, Brandon turned to Aiden. "Just because those things are slow now doesn't mean they aren't dangerous," he cautioned. "One bite and it's over." "I know," Aiden replied soberly. "Trust me, I'm not planning on getting close enough for them to try." With the barricade cleared, they stood ready at the door. Deborah gave Brandon's hand one final squeeze before stepping back. Seth handed each of them a bottle of water, which they tucked into their pockets with nods of thanks. "Ready?" Brandon asked. Aiden nodded, his expression grim but determined. "Let's do this." They pulled the door open, the sound reverberating through the stairwell like a gunshot. Both men tensed, listening intently. The familiar moans of the dead echoed up from below, but they were fewer than expected. "Not as many as I thought," Aiden whispered as they slipped through the door, letting it close softly behind them. "Let's not push our luck," Brandon replied, moving cautiously to the railing. Looking down, he could see several figures on the landings below, but not the teeming horde they had feared. They began their descent, moving as quietly as possible on the concrete steps. When they reached the 5th-floor landing, they encountered their first zombies, 2 of them, shuffling up the stairs with agonizing slowness. Their movements were labored, as if the simple act of climbing required more coordination than they could muster. "Watch this." Aiden chuckled as he stepped forward, using his chair leg like a pole to push the first zombie firmly in the center of its chest. The creature, already unsteady on the stairs, toppled backward, colliding with its companion. Both tumbled down the steps, landing in a heap on the landing below, their skulls cracking audibly against the concrete. Brandon nodded approvingly, like bowling with zombies. "It's a shame we aren't keeping score," Aiden replied with a chuckle. They continued downward, encountering a few more of the undead as they went. Each time they employed the same strategy, a strategic push, letting gravity and unyielding concrete do the work for them. By the time they reached the 2nd floor, they had dispatched 6 zombies without breaking a sweat. "First floor is going to be a problem," Aiden observed, peering down the final flight of stairs. Both men knew that the front entrance to the building was wide open thanks to a car plowing through it. Given the number of zombies on the street, it was safe to assume there were far too many to handle on the 1st floor. "We're not going that way," Brandon decided. "2nd floor, north side. There's a community room halfway down the hall that overlooks a grassy area with trees. We can go out through there." "Sounds like a plan," Aiden agreed. "Let's just hope the hallway is clear." They approached the 2nd floor door cautiously, Brandon pressing his ear against it. The sound of shuffling feet and occasional moans from the other side confirmed their fears. "Not clear," he whispered, "but we don't have much choice." Aiden nodded, tightening his grip on his weapon. "I'll take the left, you take the right." With a nod, Brandon took a deep breath, steeling himself. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. He pulled the door open, revealing a hallway that bore the unmistakable signs of the violence that had overtaken the campus. Blood stained the walls and floor in dark, dried patches. Papers and personal belongings were scattered about, and in the middle of it all, half a dozen zombies turned at the sound of the opening door, their vacant eyes fixing on fresh prey. Brandon moved without hesitation, stepping forward to meet the nearest creature. His chair leg connected with the side of its head with enough force to shatter its skull, dropping it instantly. Beside him, Aiden dispatched another with similar efficiency, driving the pointed end of his weapon up through the zombie's chin and into its brain. They fought with the practiced coordination of men who had survived the initial chaos of the outbreak. Side by side, they moved down the hallway, each blow connecting with the creature's heads. 4 zombies fell in quick succession, but 2 more appeared from an open doorway at the far end of the hall. Rather than engage, they picked up the pace, reaching the community room door well before the creatures arrived and finding it mercifully unlocked. Brandon yanked it open, allowing Aiden to go through first before following and slamming it shut behind them. The room was blessedly empty, the furniture pushed against the walls as if for a social gathering that never took place. "Secure that door," Aiden instructed, already moving toward the sliding glass doors that led to a small balcony overlooking the grounds. Brandon dragged a heavy sofa across the floor, positioning it to block the entrance they had just used, just on the off chance the zombies outside managed to pull it open. Outside the door, he could hear the remaining zombies in the hallway, drawn by the sound of their passage. With the door secured, he joined Aiden at the balcony. They slid the glass door open carefully, stepping out into the fresh air. The balcony was small, designed more for smokers than socializing, but it offered a clear view of the space below. What they saw made their hearts sink. At least 24 zombies wandered the grassy area beneath them. The jump from the second floor wouldn't be deadly, but it would certainly be noisy and possibly injurious if they landed wrong. "That's a lot more than I expected," Aiden muttered, his eyes scanning for a clear landing zone. Before Brandon could respond, another series of gunshots rang out from the direction of the agriculture building, closer now that they were outside. The sound was urgent, almost desperate, suggesting whoever was firing was in serious trouble. "We need to move," Brandon said, his resolve hardening. "Now." Chapter 7. Brandon stared at the situation below from his second-floor vantage point. The undead were scattered across the grassy area, not clustered tightly enough to be an impenetrable wall, but certainly numerous enough to pose a serious threat. Another burst of gunfire in the distance reminded him that time was a luxury they couldn't afford. "So what's the plan?" Aiden asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Both drop down at the same time, back to back?" Brandon shook his head. "Too risky. If one of us lands wrong, the other is compromised too." He pointed to a nearest zombie that was about 7 yards away from their landing zone. "I'll drop first. You toss down the weapons, then follow." Aiden considered this for a moment, then nodded. "Makes sense. You ready?" "As I'll ever be," Brandon replied, swinging his legs over the railing. He carefully lowered himself down, hanging from the edge of the balcony by his fingertips. The drop was about 4 feet before his feet would touch the ground. Not dangerous under normal circumstances, but in this new world, the noise of his landing could mean life or death. With a deep breath, he let go. Brandon hit the ground with bent knees, absorbing the impact as best he could. Despite landing on grass, the thud of his arrival seemed thunderously loud in the quiet afternoon. He ducked into a crouch immediately, watching as several of the nearest zombies turned toward the sound, their vacant eyes fixing on him with newfound purpose. The chair legs came down seconds later, landing with a soft thump beside him. Brandon snatched them up, rising to a fighting stance just as the first zombie closed in. With a practiced motion, he drove the sharpened end of his makeshift weapon through the creature's eye socket, dropping it instantly. Above, Aiden was already lowering himself over the edge of the balcony. 2 more zombies had noticed the commotion and shuffled toward Brandon with increasing speed. He dispatched the nearer one with a swift strike to the temple, then spun to face the second. This one moved with surprising quickness for a creature in its state of decay, forcing Brandon to sidestep its grasping hands before delivering the killing blow. The sound of Aiden hitting the ground pulled more attention their way. 4 zombies now converged on their position, moving with the single-minded determination of predators that had detected prey. "Here," Brandon called, tossing Aiden his weapon. Aiden caught it deftly, immediately assuming a fighting stance beside Brandon. "Just like old times," Aiden quipped, driving the spike portion of his weapon through the head of the nearest zombie. They fought efficiently, conserving energy with precise strikes rather than wild swings. As the initial group of zombies fell, they began moving across the field, heading toward what appeared to be a narrow gap between clusters of the undead. "There," Brandon pointed. "Cut through the middle, aim for the street." Aiden nodded, already moving. They advanced side by side now, targeting only the zombies directly in their path. When 2 came at them simultaneously, they shifted tactics. Instead of using their weapons, they lowered their shoulders and charged, their athletic builds allowing them to knock the lighter, decomposing creatures off balance. "Football has its uses after all," Aiden remarked after sending a particularly decrepit zombie tumbling to the ground with a well-placed shoulder check. They reached the edge of the grass, the street now just yards away. But as they emerged onto the sidewalk, the true scale of their predicament became clear. In both directions, dozens of zombies filled the road, drawn by the gunfire still echoing from the agriculture building. That way, Brandon decided, pointing in the direction of the shots. They moved quickly, hugging the buildings for cover, dispatching any zombies that got too close. They managed to make it a full block before the street ahead became impassable, the concentration of the undead too dense to fight through. "We're not getting through that," Aiden muttered, sweat beading on his forehead from the exertion. "Over here," a female voice suddenly called out. "Quickly!" They spun toward the sound, spotting a middle-aged woman waving frantically from the doorway of a building across the street. Without hesitation, they darted toward her, weaving between the scattered zombies that lurched at them. As they reached the door, the woman stepped back to let them in, slamming it shut the moment they cleared the threshold. Two students, a young man and woman, immediately began securing it with a metal bar that slid into brackets on either side. "That was close," the older woman said, her voice betraying her nerves despite her composed expression. "I'm Professor Lewis, Biology Department. These two are Cole and Julia." Brandon and Aiden nodded to the students, who appeared to be in their early 20s. Both looked exhausted but uninjured, suggesting they'd been sheltering in place since the beginning of the outbreak. "Brandon," he introduced himself, still catching his breath. "And this is Aiden. We're from Dormitory Hall B." "Dormitory Hall B?" Professor Lewis asked. "That's quite a run from here. How did you make it this far?" "Carefully," Aiden replied with a wry smile, "and with a bit of luck." "What brought you out?" Julia asked, her voice soft but steady. "It's not exactly a nice day to be on the streets." "There's a dozen or so of us trapped up on the 10th floor. Been there since the start of this mess," Brandon began. "When we heard the gunshots, we figured it was our chance to let someone know that we're here and need help." "We've been trapped here for weeks," Professor Lewis said, shaking her head. "The three of us were working late in the lab when everything went to hell. No one else was in the building, which turned out to be a blessing in disguise. We've been secure but completely isolated." "Have you seen anyone else?" Brandon asked. Cole shook his head. "Just those things. They're everywhere. We've been monitoring the radio, but there's been nothing for days." "We need to get to the agriculture building," Aiden interjected, gesturing in the direction of the continuing gunfire. "We think that's where the shots are coming from." Professor Lewis's eyes lit up with sudden understanding. "You should use the crosswalks." "Crosswalks?" Brandon repeated. "The elevated walkways between buildings," she explained, already moving toward a stairwell. "Second floor. The science buildings are all connected. Come on." They followed her up the stairs, Cole and Julia trailing behind. The interior of the building was pristine compared to their dormitory, suggesting they had successfully kept it free of infected since the beginning. "We secured the walkway doors," Professor Lewis explained as they ascended, "but we've heard noises from the other side. We've never risked opening them." When they reached the second floor, she led them down a corridor to a set of double doors that had been chained together. Brandon pressed his ear up to the metal door, hearing faint sounds of moaning coming from the other side. "When you get to the next building, head to the right as soon as you can," she instructed. "The next crosswalk is on the opposite corner. That will take you directly into the agriculture building." She paused, considering something. "If the sound isn't coming from there, you'll have to get back to ground level. There aren't any connections past that point." Brandon nodded, absorbing the information. "Thank you. We appreciate the help." Professor Lewis hesitated, then reached into her pocket and produced a key. "This opens the doors from this side. We barricaded ours, but the others should still be open." She paused after saying that, as if the realization that the doors were open would mean there wasn't anybody left alive in those buildings. The professor unlocked the door, swinging it open carefully. Immediately, the sound of shuffling feet and low moans greeted them. 6 zombies were visible in the walkway, all turning toward the sudden influx of light and the promise of fresh food. Brandon and Aiden moved as one, stepping through the doorway with weapons raised. The confined space of the walkway worked to their advantage, allowing them to engage the zombies 2 at a time. They dispatched the creatures with brutal efficiency, each strike precisely targeted to penetrate the skull and destroy the brain. When the last zombie fell, Brandon turned back to see Professor Lewis watching with a mixture of horror and fascination. "Headshots," he explained grimly. It's the only way to put them down for good. She nodded slowly, absorbing this information. I hope I never have to put that knowledge to practical use. I wish I was that lucky, Brandon replied. Professor Lewis stepped back, her hand on the door. Be careful, and if you find help out there, we'll send them your way, Aiden promised. With a nod of thanks, she closed and secured the door behind them, leaving Brandon and Aiden alone in the walkway with the bodies of the dead. Let's move, Brandon said, already heading for the exit on the other side. The next building was eerily quiet compared to the dormitory. Occasional moans echoed from distant corners, but the hallways were mostly clear. They moved quickly, following Professor Lewis's directions to the opposite corner where they found the next walkway. This bridge stood wide open, its doors left unlocked and opened ever since the apocalypse first erupted. They crossed cautiously, entering the agriculture building to the sound of gunfire, much louder and clearer now. It's definitely coming from this floor, Aiden whispered, orienting himself toward the noise. They moved down the hallway, the sounds of struggle growing more distinct with each step. As they rounded a corner, they discovered the source of the commotion. A massive horde of zombies filled the corridor ahead, all pressing toward a door at the far end. Gunshots continued to ring out, suggesting whoever was inside was making a last stand. We're not getting through that, Brandon muttered, pulling Aiden into a nearby classroom. There must be 50 of them. Aiden peered through the doorway at the writhing mass of undead. Whoever's in there, they're in serious trouble. The window across the classroom offered a view of the side of the building. To their relief, the ground below appeared clear of zombies. We go outside, Aiden suggested, see if we can get their attention another way. Brandon considered this for a moment, then nodded. Worth a shot. Looks pretty clear down there. They forced the window open, grimacing at the screech of metal that had likely gone unoiled for months. After confirming the area was indeed free of zombies, they repeated their earlier maneuver, hanging from the ledge to reduce the height of the drop before letting go. The landing was softer this time, a flower bed providing additional cushioning. They moved swiftly around the corner to the back of the building, where the sound of gunfire was loudest. As they approached, they spotted a small group of zombies clustered beneath a window on the second floor, arms raised upward toward the source of the noise. The creatures had their backs to Brandon and Aiden, completely fixated on their prey above. Easy pickings, Aiden whispered, readying his weapon. They approached from behind, Brandon taking the zombie on the left while Aiden handled the one on the right. Their synchronized strikes dropped both creatures instantly. The third turned at the sound, only to receive Brandon's chair leg through its eye socket. With the immediate threat neutralized, they examined the window above. It was closed, but occasional flashes of gunfire illuminated the glass from within. How do we get their attention? Aiden asked. Brandon bent down, scooping up a clod of dirt from the garden bed. Old school, he replied, tossing the dirt against the window. The first throw made a soft pattering sound, but elicited no response from inside. The second, more forceful attempt caused a smear of mud across the glass. From within, the gunfire paused briefly. Encouraged, Brandon and Aiden both grabbed larger handfuls of soil, hurling them at the window simultaneously. The impact was loud enough to be heard over the chaos inside. Moments later, the window inched open, and a face appeared, a man with short dark hair and confusion in his eyes, scrutinizing the scene below with suspicion that quickly transformed to surprise. Brandon grinned up at him, offering a casual wave despite the absurdity of the situation. "Hey," he called out, keeping his voice low enough not to attract more zombies. "Do y'all need a hand?" Chapter 8. James stared down at the two young men standing below the window, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. He blinked several times, as if trying to convince himself they weren't a hallucination born of stress. "Where in the hell did you two come from?" he finally called down, keeping his voice low enough to avoid attracting more of the undead. Brandon grinned up at him. "We're locals," he replied with a casual shrug, as if meeting in the middle of a zombie apocalypse was perfectly normal. "Heard the gunshots. Sounds like you could use some help." James glanced back over his shoulder, where the sounds of Tech's gunfire still echoed as he held the zombies at bay in the hallway. Emma stood beside him, clutching one of their hard-won bag of seeds to her chest. Her face tense, with the knowledge that their situation was growing more desperate by the minute. "Yeah," James admitted, turning back to the window. "You could say that." He scanned the area beyond the two students, his gaze settling on a small structure about 50 yards away, nestled between two fields. "There's a maintenance shed over there. Might have a ladder we could use, but I can see movement in the fields, so you need to be careful." Brandon and Aiden followed his gaze, spotting the shambling figures moving aimlessly among the withered crops. There weren't many, perhaps half a dozen in total, but enough to complicate their rescue attempt if they weren't careful. "We'll be right back," Brandon promised, already turning away. "Hang tight." Before James could respond, the two young men were sprinting toward the shed, moving swiftly through the field. They approached the first zombie from behind, Aiden swinging his makeshift weapon through the base of its skull without breaking stride. Brandon dispatched another with similar efficiency, the creature dropping to the ground in a heap of rotting flesh. James watched, impressed by their coordination. Whoever these guys were, they clearly knew what they were doing. The maintenance shed was a small metal structure, its door secured with a simple padlock. Aiden smashed the lock with his makeshift weapon and they slipped inside, disappearing from James's view. Inside the shed, Brandon and Aiden found themselves surrounded by the mundane tools of groundskeeping: rakes, shovels, bags of fertilizer, and various gardening implements. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight that filtered through the dirty windows, suggesting the shed had been undisturbed since the beginning of the outbreak. "There," Aiden said, pointing to the back wall where an extension ladder lay on its side, partially hidden behind a stack of empty planters. They worked quickly to clear a path, dragging the ladder out into the open. It was aluminum, lightweight but sturdy, extending to about 20 feet when fully deployed. "Perfect," Brandon declared, already hoisting one end. "Let's go." They exited the shed, each carrying an end of the ladder, moving as quickly as possible while maintaining their awareness of the surrounding area. Another zombie emerged from between rows of withered corn, but with their hands occupied, they could only dodge around it, leaving it moaning and shuffling in their wake. James watched their approach with growing hope. When they reached the building, they positioned the ladder against the wall just beneath the window, extending it until it reached about 2 feet below the sill. "Your ride's here," Brandon called up with a grin. James turned to Emma, gesturing toward the window. "Ladies first." Emma approached hesitantly, peering down at the ladder and the two strangers holding it steady. "You sure about this?" she whispered. James nodded, his expression serious. "We're out of options. The hallway's not going to hold much longer." As if to emphasize his point, a particularly loud burst of gunfire erupted from behind them, followed by Tech's voice calling out, "Getting a little crowded in here, folks. Whatever y'all are planning, might want to speed it up." That decided it. Emma slung the canvas bag of seeds across her body, securing it tightly, then climbed out onto the window ledge. With a deep breath, she reached for the ladder, finding the top rung with her foot before transferring her weight onto it. Brandon and Aiden held the ladder steady as she descended, their faces turned upward, alert for any sign of trouble. When she reached the bottom, James followed, a similar bag slung across his back. Just as James's feet touched the ground, a sharp whistle pierced the air. Looking up, they saw Tex at the window, his revolvers holstered as he prepared to make his exit. Without hesitation, he swung himself out, gripped the side rails of the ladder, and slid down in one smooth motion, his boots barely touching the rungs. He landed with a slight bounce, adjusting his hat as if he'd done nothing more remarkable than step off a curb. Brandon stared at him, his eyes wide with recognition. "Holy shit," he breathed. "You're Tex, the trick shooter from the Old West theme park." A hint of a smile played at the corners of Tex's mouth. "That I am, partner," he confirmed, tipping his hat slightly. "And while I'd be happy to sign autographs later, I suggest we find some place a little quieter to get acquainted." No sooner had he spoken than a moan from nearby reminded them of their precarious position. Several zombies had noticed the commotion and were now converging on their location from the surrounding fields. "This way," James said, already moving away from the building. "We've got to get back to our truck." The group of 5 ran through the field, Tex bringing up the rear. When 2 zombies emerged unexpectedly from behind the storage shed, Tex drew both his revolvers in one fluid motion. The guns barked twice in rapid succession, and both creatures dropped with perfect bullet holes in the center of their foreheads. "Damn," Brandon whispered, glancing back at Tex with undisguised admiration. "That was the coolest thing I've ever seen." "Eyes forward, kid," Tex advised, though the hint of a smile suggested he appreciated the compliment. They reached the neighborhood without further incident, slowing their movement in order to scan the area for threats. The zombie they had spotted on their way in had shambled off, seemingly no longer interested in them. "There's our ride," James said, pointing to the truck another block up. They piled into the vehicle, James behind the wheel, Emma in the passenger seat, with Tex, Brandon, and Aiden jumping into the back. The engine roared to life, and they pulled away from the curb, accelerating quickly to put distance between themselves and the university campus. They had gone about a mile when Brandon suddenly leaned forward, banging his hand on the truck's roof. "Pull over," he called out. James shot him a confused look through the rearview mirror but complied, guiding the truck onto a dirt access road that led into an empty field. He killed the engine, turning in his seat to face the others. "What's going on?" he demanded. Brandon leaned forward, his expression intense. "We need to talk," he said, "about going back." "Going back?" Emma repeated, disbelief evident in her voice. "To the university? Are you insane?" "There are people there," Brandon insisted. "Survivors, in our dorm, in other buildings. They need help." James shook his head firmly. "Look, I appreciate what you did back there. Truly. You probably saved our lives, but we barely made it out ourselves. I'm in no hurry to revisit that nightmare." "We have to try," Aiden joined in, backing up his friend. "There are at least a dozen people in our dorm alone. Food's running low. They won't last much longer on their own." "And if we hadn't come to help you," Brandon added pointedly, "the three of you would be dead right now." A tense silence filled the truck cab as James and Emma exchanged glances, clearly weighing the moral implications of abandoning survivors against the very real risk of attempting a rescue. "How many people are we talking about?" James finally asked, his tone suggesting he was at least willing to consider the idea. "Like Aiden said, at least a dozen in our dorm," Brandon replied, "plus Professor Lewis and her 2 students in the biology building, and who knows how many others scattered across campus." "That's a lot of people," Emma said quietly. "Even if we wanted to help, how would we get them all out of there? And where would they even go?" Tex, who had been silently observing the discussion, finally spoke up. "There's plenty of room at the park," he said. "Enough space for everyone, especially if we're growing our own food." He nodded toward the canvas bags that held their precious cargo of seeds. "Wait, you're planning on growing your own food?" Aiden interjected. "That's the plan," James said sheepishly, backing down slightly at Aiden's tone, as if he realized the college student knew something he didn't. "Do you have any farmers in your group? People who actually know how to grow crops?" Aiden followed up. James and Emma looked at each other, the realization dawning on their faces simultaneously. "No," James admitted. "We don't." "Well, we have 3 agriculture students in our group," Brandon said, seizing the advantage. "And Professor Lewis is a biologist. She probably knows a thing or two about plant growth." James sat back in his seat, running a hand through his hair as he considered the situation. It was Tex who broke the silence. "The boy's got a point," he said to James. "Seeds don't do us much good without the knowledge to make them grow." "Even if we decided to help, how would we do it?" Emma asked, her practical nature asserting itself. "We can't fit that many people in this truck." Aiden leaned forward eagerly. "We could steal a bus," he suggested. "From near the stadium, where they park the team buses. City buses would be locked up or stuck behind traffic jams, but the campus route from the stadium to the dorms should be fairly clear. The stadium's on the west side of campus," Brandon added. "We could approach from the outer roads, avoid the worst of the zombie concentrations." James considered this for a long moment, then turned to Tex. "What do you think? You've got the most combat experience among us." Tex adjusted his hat, his expression thoughtful. "It's risky," he admitted, "but these boys are right. We have a responsibility to help if we can." He glanced at the canvas bags of seeds. "And practical considerations aside, those survivors could make the difference between our community thriving or starving." James nodded slowly, coming to a decision. "All right," he said, "but we do this smart, in and out, no unnecessary risks." "Agreed," Brandon replied quickly, relief evident in his voice. So the stadium first, Emma confirmed, already studying the map they'd been using earlier that day. Then the dorms, then the biology building. And then straight back to the theme park, James added firmly. No detours, no heroics. They all nodded in agreement, the plan taking shape in their minds. James started the truck engine again, pulling back onto the main road. As they drove toward the stadium, Brandon exchanged a look of triumph with Aiden. They knew they had done the easy part, convincing them to help. But into the back of their minds, they knew the most difficult fight was still ahead of them. Tex seemed to read his thoughts. "You boys ready for what comes next?" he asked quietly, his experienced eyes measuring them. "Ready as we'll ever be," Brandon replied, his earlier bravado tempered by the reality of what they were about to attempt. "Those are our friends up there. We can't leave them." Tex nodded, a hint of respect in his expression. "Then let's go get 'em then." Chapter 9. The truck crawled along the outskirts of town, deliberately avoiding the downtown area where the concentration of zombies would be heaviest. James navigated the back roads cautiously, knowing that there weren't any tow trucks available to pull them out of the ditch. As they approached the stadium, James pulled onto a side street about half a mile out, killing the engine. The massive structure loomed in the distance, its once proud silhouette now an ominous reminder of gatherings that would never happen again. "I can see movement even from here," Emma observed, squinting through the windshield at the distant figures milling around the parking lot. "I can't tell how many, but it definitely looks like it's more than we want to deal with." "Could be worse," Tex remarked from the back. "Stadium would have been packed if this thing hit on game day." Brandon leaned forward between the front seats. "So what's the plan? We can't just drive up and honk?" "Actually," James said, a thoughtful expression crossing his face, "that's exactly what we're going to do." The group fell silent, waiting for him to elaborate. James turned in his seat, scanning their faces before continuing. "We split into two teams. Brandon and I will take the truck around to the north side of the stadium, using the service roads. We lay on the horn, draw as many of those things away from the parking lot as we can. While we get to the buses," Emma finished, catching on quickly. James nodded. "Tex, Aiden, and Emma, you'll approach from the south side. Once the coast is relatively clear, make your run for the buses." "Why me?" Emma asked. "Wouldn't you be better for that part?" "Can you drive a bus?" James asked directly. Emma nodded. "Used to drive a shuttle for summer camp. Not exactly the same, but close enough." "That's why," James confirmed. "Brandon and I will keep those things distracted, then circle back to the edge of campus. You three take the bus in, get the survivors, and meet us at the rendezvous point." "Sounds solid," Tex agreed, checking his ammunition. "The old divide and conquer, gotta love a classic." "What's the rendezvous point?" Aiden asked. James paused, considering. "Let's meet by that country road turnoff we made when coming up from the farm." They spent the next few minutes going over the details, ensuring everyone understood their roles. Watches were synchronized, routes confirmed, and contingencies discussed. Finally, James started the truck engine again. "Everyone clear on what they're doing?" he asked one last time. Nods all around confirmed they were ready. James drove forward another quarter mile before pulling over, allowing Tex, Aiden, and Emma to climb out, weapons at the ready. "Be careful," Brandon called to Aiden through the open window. "You too," Aiden replied with a slight nod. "I'll see you soon." As the trio disappeared down a narrow alley, James pulled back onto the road, beginning their circuitous route to the north side of the stadium. "So," Brandon said into the silence that had settled between them, "the theme park, huh? How's that working out as a survival spot?" James glanced over, seemingly appreciative of the attempt at conversation. "Better than you might think. 10-foot fence all around, plenty of buildings for shelter. We've got about 20 people there now." "How'd you end up there?" Brandon asked. "Pure luck," James admitted. "I was working when everything went to hell. It was a bitch to get secure, but we managed to get it done." "Smart move," Brandon remarked. "What about you? The dorms don't seem like an ideal place to ride this out." Brandon shrugged. "Wasn't exactly planned. We were having a mixer when all this started up. One second we're having drinks, the next thing we know, there's a car plowing through the front of the building with one of those things behind the wheel. Jesus, that's a hell of a way to kick off the apocalypse. Tell me about it. It almost took me out before things even got started, but a group of us managed to fight our way to the top of the building, and we've been sitting there ever since. At least until you guys came a-calling. Brandon let out a chuckle as they continued exchanging stories as James navigated the back roads, each recounting the early days of the outbreak from their perspective. Before too long, however, they were in position. "Here we are," James announced, bringing the truck to a stop at the edge of a service road that provided a clear view of the stadium's north parking lot. From this vantage point, they could see dozens of zombies shambling aimlessly around the concrete expanse. "You ready?" James asked, hand hovering over the horn. Brandon nodded, gripping his makeshift weapon a little tighter. "Let's make some noise." James pressed his palm against the center of the steering wheel, producing a long, sustained blast that shattered the eerie quiet. The effect was immediate. Every zombie in sight turned toward the sound, their vacant eyes somehow focusing with terrifying intensity. "Keep it up," Brandon encouraged, as James continued to lay on the horn in intermittent bursts, designed to maintain the creature's interest. They watched as the zombies began to converge on their position, shuffling with single-minded determination toward the source of the noise. What had been a scattered collection of undead was now forming into a loose horde, all moving in their direction. "It's working," Brandon observed, counting at least 20 zombies now lumbering toward them. James nodded, continuing the pattern of horn blasts. "Let's give it a few more minutes." They sat in the idling truck, maintaining the audio beacon while the zombies drew steadily closer. The lead creatures had reduced the distance to about 100 yards when Brandon spotted movement from the far side of the parking lot. "There they go," he said, pointing to 3 small figures darting between vehicles toward a small structure near the buses. "Good," James said, letting up on the horn for a moment to give his hand a rest. "Now we just need to keep these things occupied a little longer." The zombies continued their approach, now close enough that individual features were becoming discernible: torn clothing, bloodied faces, the occasional missing limb. Something about seeing them up close made them seem more pitiable than terrifying, Brandon thought. Whatever they had once been, professors, students, ordinary people with hopes and dreams, was long gone, replaced by these shambling husks driven by hunger alone. "You ever wonder what they're thinking?" Brandon asked suddenly. "If anything's left of the people they used to be?" James shook his head firmly. "Better not to think about it. They're not people anymore. Can't afford to see them that way." Another minute passed, the zombies now within 50 yards of their position. James started the engine, preparing for their exit. "That's close enough," he declared, shifting into drive. "Time to go." The truck pulled away, slowly at first, maintaining the zombies' interest without outpacing them entirely. As they rounded a corner, James accelerated, putting distance between them and their undead pursuit. "Mission accomplished," he said, with a hint of satisfaction. On the opposite side of the stadium, Tex, Aiden, and Emma crouched behind a maintenance building, watching the parking lot carefully. The distant sound of the truck's horn had just begun echoing across the campus, drawing the attention of the wandering dead. "Wait for it," Tex murmured, one hand resting on his rifle. "Let them clear out a bit more." Aiden nodded, keeping his eyes on a zombie that had been shambling just a few yards from their position. The creature's head lifted at the sound of the horn, its body slowly pivoting toward the noise. After a moment's hesitation, it began moving away from them, joining the others responding to the distant call. They remained silent, watching as the parking lot gradually emptied, the majority of zombies drawn away by James and Brandon's diversion. After several minutes, Tex gave a slight nod. "Now's our chance," he said quietly. "Building by the buses first. That's where the keys should be." Emma pointed to a small prefabricated structure positioned near the entrance to the bus parking area. "That must be it. Security office or dispatcher." "Let's move," Tex instructed. "Quick and quiet." They darted from behind their cover, moving in a low crouch across the open expanse. Despite the diversion, a few zombies remained scattered throughout the lot, though none were in their immediate path. They reached the small building without incident, pressing themselves against the wall beside the door. Tex peered through the window, confirming it was empty. "Locked," he whispered, trying the handle. Aiden didn't hesitate. He swung his chair leg against the small window in the door, the impact creating a sharp crack that seemed impossibly loud in the open air. Glass tinkled to the floor inside as he reached through the broken pane, feeling for the lock. A moan from nearby indicated at least one zombie had noticed the commotion. Tex turned, rifle raised, spotting the creature emerging from between two parked cars about 20 yards away. "Hurry," he urged quietly. Aiden found the lock, twisting it open with a click. He and Emma slipped inside while Tex remained at the door, keeping watch. The interior was cramped but organized. A dispatch desk with radio equipment, filing cabinets against one wall, and a small break area with a mini fridge in the corner. Emma immediately began rifling through drawers while Aiden checked the desk. Come on," Emma muttered, frustration mounting as each drawer revealed nothing useful. "That's gotta be it," Aiden suddenly exclaimed, pointing to a key box mounted on the far wall. He rushed over, finding it unlocked. Inside hung dozens of keys, each on a labeled hook. "Team buses, shuttle buses," he read aloud, quickly scanning the labels. "Here, team bus." He grabbed the set of keys, turning back to Emma with a triumphant grin. Their moment of victory was short-lived. Tex's urgent voice carried through the open door. "We've got company." They rushed outside to find Tex aiming his rifle toward the line of buses. What they saw made their hearts sink. A dozen zombies had shambled out from between the vehicles, apparently not drawn by the distant horn. They now stood between the three survivors and their target. "What now?" Emma whispered, clutching the keys. Tex's expression hardened. "Now we do this the loud way." He raised his rifle to his shoulder. "Stay behind me and be ready to run." Without further warning, he fired. The crack of the rifle split the air and the nearest zombie dropped with a hole in its forehead. Tex worked the lever action like he was performing his Saturday afternoon show, firing again and again in rapid succession. Each shot found its mark, zombies falling like dominoes as he systematically cleared a path to the buses. "Go," Tex ordered as he ejected a spent shell and chambered another round. Emma and Aiden sprinted forward, weaving between the fallen bodies. The gunfire had drawn attention, and zombies that had been moving away were now turning back, drawn by the closer, sharper sound. "Keys!" Aiden shouted as they reached the first bus. Emma thrust the keyring into his hands. He fumbled through them, trying each in the door lock as Tex continued firing behind them, the rhythm of his shots as steady and methodical as a metronome. "Hurry up," Emma urged, watching as more zombies began to appear from around the stadium. "I'm trying," Aiden snapped, his fingers trembling slightly as he tried another key. "There are like half a dozen keys on this ring." Finally, the lock turned with a satisfying click. Aiden yanked the door open, gesturing for Emma to climb aboard. She rushed up the steps, immediately moving to the driver's seat. "Tex," Aiden called out. "Let's go." Tex backed toward them, still firing, his rifle creating a steady beat of death as zombie after zombie fell. When he reached the bus, he swiftly climbed aboard, allowing Aiden to close the door behind him. Emma was already in the driver's seat, familiarizing herself with the controls. The key slid into the ignition, and the engine roared to life, a sound more beautiful than any symphony to their ears. Zombies began surrounding the bus, their decaying hands slapping against the sides, leaving smears of dark crimson on the paint job. Their moans, muffled by the metal walls of the vehicle, created a grotesque chorus that seemed to come from all directions at once. Tex reloaded his rifle methodically, keeping a watchful eye on the creatures outside. Aiden collapsed into a seat, the adrenaline of their escape leaving him slightly shaky. "We did it," he breathed, a disbelieving laugh escaping him. "Not yet," Emma corrected, her hands gripping the large steering wheel tightly. "We still need to get to the dorms." She shifted the bus into gear, the air brakes hissing as she released them. With a grim smile of determination, Emma pressed down on the accelerator. Next up, the dorms. Chapter 10. The team bus rumbled down the empty street, its diesel engine unnaturally loud in the quiet that had settled over the university. Emma sat behind the wheel, her knuckles white against the black plastic as she navigated around abandoned vehicles and the occasional wandering zombie. "Take a left at the next intersection," Aiden directed from behind her, leaning forward between the seats. "That'll put us on University Avenue, straight shot to the dorms." Emma nodded, making the turn smoothly despite the vehicle size. As they approached the heart of campus, the scattered zombies became more numerous, converging on the unfamiliar sound of the bus engine. "Getting crowded out there," Tex observed from his position by the door, rifle resting across his lap as he surveyed the growing horde through the large windows. "Should I go around?" Emma asked, slowing as a particularly dense cluster of zombies appeared ahead. Aiden shook his head. "No, we're fine, just push through. This thing's basically a tank compared to them." Emma took a deep breath, then pressed down on the accelerator. The bus surged forward, its massive front grille connecting with the first zombie with a sickening thud. The creature bounced off, tumbling to the pavement as the bus continued on. More impacts followed as Emma drove straight through the crowd, the large vehicle barely shuddering at the collisions. "That's it," Aiden encouraged. "Not too fast, though. Don't want them getting caught in the wheel wells." Emma maintained a steady speed, just enough to push through without losing control. Zombies slapped against the sides of the bus, unnerving the trio of occupants despite them not being a threat. Their moans, though muffled by the metal walls, created an eerie backdrop to the engine's rumble. "There it is," Aiden announced, pointing ahead to where Dormitory Hall B that was up on the next block. "Pull up as close as you can to the east side. Second floor has those extended windowsills we can use." Emma guided the bus off the road, the tires bumping over the curb onto the wide sidewalk that ran alongside the building. She maneuvered carefully, bringing the vehicle to a stop just feet from the brick wall, positioning it beneath a row of windows on the second floor. "Perfect," Aiden declared, already moving toward the rear of the bus where the emergency roof hatch was located. "Tex, you're with me." Tex nodded, checking his revolvers before following Aiden down the aisle. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated," he drawled with a wink to Emma. "We'll be resuming our regularly scheduled evacuation shortly." Aiden pushed against the roof hatch, the metal panel swinging upward to reveal the clear blue sky above. He climbed through first, pulling himself onto the roof of the bus with ease. Tex followed close behind, his movements fluid despite his age, his hand hovering over his six-shooter as he emerged into the open air. The flat roof of the bus gave them a stable platform, raising them to within a few feet of the second-floor windows. Aiden approached the nearest one, cupping his hands around his eyes to peer inside. The room beyond appeared empty, though the limited angle made it difficult to be certain. "We need to open it," he said, reaching up to test the window. It was locked from the inside. "Have to break it." "Stand back," Tex instructed, drawing his revolver. Aiden moved aside as Tex took aim, his steady hand pointing the weapon at the lower corner of the glass. The shot rang out, the bullet punching through with precision, creating a small hole rather than shattering the entire pane. Tex fired twice more in quick succession, placing the bullets in a triangle pattern that weakened the structure of the glass. "That should do it," he said, holstering his weapon and picking up a small piece of debris from the roof of the bus. With a targeted throw, he struck the center of the triangle, causing the weakened glass to crack and fall inward. As Tex reached toward the opening to clear away the remaining shards, a sudden movement from inside caught them both by surprise. A figure lunged at the window, its decaying face contorted in a silent snarl. The zombie, once a young student judging by its collegiate sweatshirt, clawed at the opening, trying to reach them. Without hesitation, Tex's hand moved to his holster, drawing his revolver in one fluid motion. The shot echoed across the campus, the bullet finding its mark directly between the creature's eyes. It crumpled instantly, disappearing from view as it fell back into the room. Tex spun the revolver around his finger before smoothly returning it to its holster, the entire sequence so quick that Aiden barely had time to register what had happened. "Damn," Aiden breathed, staring at Tex with undisguised admiration. "Sorry if I startled you there, partner." He looked hungry, Tex replied with a modest shrug, though the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth suggested he wasn't entirely displeased with the reaction. "No worries. Even though I haven't been to the gym in a couple of weeks, I know I still look pretty tempting to a certain crowd," Aiden replied with a smirk. They approached the window again, more cautiously this time. Aiden used a piece of the broken glass to clear the remaining shards from the frame, then reached in to unlock it fully. After listening for any sounds of movement, he swung the window wide open and climbed through, with Tex following close behind. The dorm room was mercifully empty save for the body of the zombie Tex had dispatched. It appeared to have been trapped in the room since all this began, with personal belongings scattered about as if the zombified student hadn't been pleased being confined to the tiny room. "Hallway's likely to have company," Aiden whispered, moving toward the door. "There were several last time we came through." Tex nodded, reloading his revolver methodically. "I'll take point. You open the door, I'll clear the way." Aiden positioned himself beside the door, hand on the knob, waiting for Tex's signal. With a nod from the older man, he turned the handle and pushed the door open in one swift motion. Tex stepped into the doorway, instantly assessing the situation. 3 zombies stood about 10 yards down the corridor, their heads turning at the sound of the opening door. Without hesitation, Tex raised his revolver, his palm fanning the hammer with incredible speed as he fired 3 shots in rapid succession. Each bullet found its mark, and the creatures dropped where they stood, dark fluid pooling beneath their shattered skulls. "Those puppies have been put down," Tex announced, the smell of gunpowder hanging in the air around them. They moved quickly to the stairwell door at the end of the hallway, Aiden pausing by it before cautiously pushing it open. To their relief, the concrete stairwell beyond was empty, the echoing space silent, save for the distant moans that seemed to permeate the entire building. 10 flights up, Aiden said, already starting the ascent. "Hope you're in shape." Tex chuckled, following behind. "Been climbing up and down those theme park hills for years. This ain't nothing." As they climbed, Aiden glanced back at Tex. "You know, I saw you perform at the park when I was 12. My dad took me for my birthday." "Is that so?" Tex replied, seeming genuinely interested. "Yeah, you did this trick where you shot 6 targets while rolling across the stage. I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen." Aiden's voice carried a hint of the childlike wonder he'd felt that day. "Never imagined I'd be climbing a stairwell with you during the zombie apocalypse." Tex laughed softly. "Life takes some strange turns, don't it?" "When all this started, I was worried about my basketball tryout," Aiden admitted. "Seems pretty insignificant now." "You play?" Tex asked. "I was on the team last year. Was hoping to get on scholarship this season." Aiden shrugged. "Guess those dreams are on hold indefinitely." "Well, for what it's worth, those quick reflexes of yours are serving you better now than they would on any court," Tex observed. They fell into companionable silence as they continued their climb, each lost in thoughts of the world that had been. When they finally reached the 10th floor, Aiden approached the door cautiously, listening for any signs of danger beyond. "Should be clear," he whispered. "Our people have kept this floor secure." He knocked on the door in a specific pattern, 3 quick taps followed by 2 slower ones. After a moment, they heard the sound of furniture being moved, and then the door swung open to reveal Deborah, her eyes widening in surprise as she recognized Aiden. "Aiden?" she exclaimed, her gaze darting past him to the stairwell beyond. "Where's Brandon? Is he okay?" "He's fine," Aiden assured her quickly, stepping into the cafeteria. "He's with a new friend, securing our escape route. We've got a bus downstairs and we're getting everyone out of here." Relief washed over Deborah's face, followed immediately by confusion as she noticed Tex. "Who's this?" "The name's Tex," the man introduced himself with a slight tip of his hat. "Pleasure to meet you, ma'am." Before Deborah could respond, George pushed his way forward from the crowd of students that had gathered at the commotion. "What's going on? What bus?" "We're evacuating," Aiden announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We've made contact with another group of survivors at the old Western theme park south of town. They've got walls, supplies, and now seeds to grow food. We're all going there." A murmur of excitement rippled through the gathered students. After weeks of isolation and dwindling hope, the prospect of rescue, of joining a larger community, was almost too good to believe. "How do we know it's safe?" George questioned, ever the skeptic. "You don't," Tex replied bluntly, "but I can guarantee it's safer than staying here." George opened his mouth as if to argue further, but Deborah cut him off. "How do we get to this bus?" "2nd floor, east side," Aiden explained. "We've got it parked right up against the building. We go down the stairs, through a dorm room, and across to the roof of the bus." "And then what?" someone from the back called out. "And then we drive to safety," Tex answered, simply. The evacuation began immediately, with Tex taking the lead back down the stairwell, checking each landing before allowing the group to continue. They moved in small clusters, the more physically capable helping those who were struggling. Deborah remained close to Aiden, peppering him with questions about Brandon and their new allies. "So, this theme park," she asked as they descended, "it's really secure?" 10-foot fence all around, Aiden confirmed. Plus, they've got people who know what they're doing. Tex here is basically a real-life cowboy, and he's not even the most capable one there. It took nearly 20 minutes to move the entire group down to the second floor and through the dorm room to the waiting bus. Emma greeted each new arrival with a reassuring smile from her position behind the wheel, directing them to find seats wherever they could. As the last of the dormitory survivors boarded, Tex turned to Aiden. "That's everyone from here, right?" Aiden nodded. "But there's one more stop we need to make. Professor Lewis and her students in the biology building." Once Tex and Aiden had climbed aboard, Emma closed the doors and carefully pulled away from the building, navigating back onto the main campus road. Following Aiden's directions, she drove 2 blocks north where the biology building stood. "There," Aiden pointed to a set of windows on the second floor. "That's where we can get them." Emma positioned the bus as close to the building as possible, then laid on the horn in 3 short bursts, hoping to get the professor's attention. Aiden climbed back to the roof of the bus through the emergency hatch, waving his arms toward the windows just across from them. For a tense moment, nothing happened, and he feared the worst. Then, a window slid open, and Professor Lewis's face appeared, her expression shifting from caution to relief as she recognized him. "Aiden, you came back," she called down, keeping her voice low despite her evident joy. "We're evacuating," Aiden explained quickly, "heading to the Old West theme park south of town. They recently decided to add an organic farm. I thought you might want to join us, Professor. They could use someone with your knowledge." Lewis glanced back into the room, apparently conferring with Cole and Julia. When she turned back to Aiden, her decision was evident in her determined expression. "We'll come," she said firmly. "Give us a moment to gather our stuff." True to her word, within minutes, Lewis and her 2 students had packed essential items into backpacks. One by one, they climbed carefully from the window onto the roof of the bus, Aiden helping them make the transition safely. "Thank you for coming back for us," Lewis said earnestly as they descended into the bus. "I was beginning to think we'd be trapped here forever." "Nobody gets left behind," Aiden replied with a simple shrug. As the new arrivals found seats among the already crowded bus, Emma pulled away from the biology building. The campus receded behind them, its once vibrant grounds now a living graveyard. Emma glanced into her rearview mirror, looking towards the survivors in the bus, addressing them directly. "Everybody strap in. We have a bit of a drive ahead of us." Chapter 11. The convoy made its way down the highway, the bus following the pickup truck as they headed south toward the theme park. Inside the bus, the atmosphere was almost celebratory, a stark contrast to the grim world outside the windows. Students who had been trapped for weeks in their dormitory talked excitedly, sharing their experiences and speculating about what awaited them at their destination. Emma kept her focus on the road, following James's truck at a safe distance. Beside her, Tex maintained a vigilant watch, his rifle across his lap, occasionally scanning the passing landscape for threats. "You doing okay?" he asked, noticing Emma's tight grip on the steering wheel. She nodded, offering a small smile. "Just can't believe we pulled it off," she admitted. "I kept expecting something to go catastrophically wrong." "Day's not over yet," Tex replied with a wry grin, though his tone was more playful than pessimistic. In the seats behind them, Aiden had joined Professor Lewis and her students, explaining in greater detail about the theme park and its current inhabitants. "So this place is really secure?" Cole asked, skepticism evident in his voice. 10-foot fence all around, Aiden confirmed. Plus, limited entry points that can be easily monitored. They've been there since the beginning without any major breaches. "And they have seeds?" Professor Lewis inquired, her academic curiosity piqued. "Just acquired today," Aiden replied. "That's what James, Emma, and Tex were doing at the agriculture building when we found them. They've got land to plant, but didn't have anyone with the knowledge to make it work." Hence your insistence that I join you, Lewis deduced, with a knowing smile. Aiden grinned. Let's just say it's a mutually beneficial arrangement. The journey continued without incident, the relatively clear highways allowing them to make good time. After about 40 minutes, Deborah, who had been sitting near the front, pointed ahead excitedly. I think I see it. In the distance, the silhouette of the theme park had come into view, its western straw buildings and distinctive entrance visible even from afar. As they drew closer, the less welcome sight of dozens of zombies in the parking lot also came into focus, the creatures wandering aimlessly around abandoned vehicles. That's a lot of those critters still hanging about, Tex remarked, studying the scene ahead. In the lead vehicle, James grabbed the radio from the dashboard, changing to the channel they monitored at the park. Wesley, do you copy? After a moment of static, a response crackled through. James, that you? Where have you been? Gabe's been worried sick. Long story, James replied. We're approaching the main gate now, and we've brought company. A lot of company. Can you find a ladder and meet us at the front entrance? There was a brief pause before Wesley's voice returned, excitement evident even through the radio's distortion. Seriously? Yeah, absolutely. I'll be there in 5. Should I have someone at the employee entrance too? Affirmative, James confirmed. We'll be splitting up. The bus will go to the main gate, truck to the employee entrance. Copy that. See you soon. James put the radio back on its hook, then rolled down his window to signal to Emma. He pointed ahead, then made a motion indicating she should pull right up to the front gate. Emma flashed her headlights in acknowledgement. What's the plan? Brandon asked from the passenger seat. Emma's going to park the bus directly against the main gate, James explained. It'll serve 2 purposes, block it off completely and give everyone a way to climb over into the park. Brandon nodded, seeing the logic. And us? We'll head for the employee entrance. With the bus pulling up, it'll draw all of those things towards it. Should give us plenty of time to grab the tools and seeds out of the back and slip in unnoticed. As they approached the theme park entrance, James split off, taking a side road that curved around toward the back of the property. Emma continued straight ahead, guiding the massive bus toward the main gate. The zombies in the parking lot immediately took notice of the approaching vehicles, turning and beginning to shamble in their direction. Emma pressed down on the accelerator, picking up speed as she aimed directly for the gate. The bus plowed through the scattered undead, their bodies bouncing off the heavy front grille like macabre speed bumps. Hold on, she called out as she maneuvered the bus into position. With a final adjustment, Emma brought the vehicle to a stop just inches from the tall metal gate, effectively sealing it off. Through the windshield, they could see movement on the other side, living people rushing toward them from inside the park. All right, everyone, Tex announced, standing and addressing the passengers. We're going up and over. Stay calm, move quickly, and do exactly as you're told. He moved to the emergency exit, pushing it open and climbing onto the roof of the bus. From his elevated position, he could see several zombies trapped in the narrow space between the bus and the gate, reaching upward with decaying arms. Inside the park, Tex spotted Melody approaching the gate, a makeshift spear in her hands. He raised his rifle, preparing to dispatch the trapped zombies, but Melody waved him off. I've got this, she called up. Save your ammunition. Tex kept his rifle trained on the creatures, ready to intervene if necessary, but Melody wielded her weapon like a trained Spartan soldier. She thrust her spear through the gaps in the gate, each strike precise and lethal, finding the zombies' eye sockets or temple with unerring accuracy. Within moments, the threat was neutralized, the creatures lying motionless at the base of the gate. All clear, Melody announced, with a hint of pride. On the other side of the park, James pulled the truck to a stop just outside the employee entrance. He and Brandon jumped out, sprinting toward the door where Wesley waited, keys in hand. A few zombies from the parking lot had noticed them and changed direction, but the creatures were still too far away to pose an immediate threat. Both men leapt from the truck, grabbing the collection of tools and seeds out of the back before slipping inside. Wesley quickly secured the door behind them. Everyone else? He asked. Coming over the main gate, James confirmed. Tex and Emma are with them. Back at the front entrance, the evacuation was proceeding smoothly. Tex remained on top of the bus, helping each person climb up from inside, then helping them over to the ladder on the other side of the gate. The students moved with the nervous energy of those who had been confined for too long, eager to reach the safety of their new home. Professor Lewis insisted on going last, making sure all of her students made it safely before allowing herself to be helped onto the roof. As Tex guided her to the edge of the bus, she paused, looking out over the parking lot filled with the wandering dead. "It's still so hard to believe," she murmured, "even after all this time." "Yes, ma'am," Tex agreed solemnly. "Don't think that feeling ever quite goes away." They gathered in the saloon, the largest building on Main Street, which had become something of a community hall for the theme park survivors. The newcomers stood awkwardly at first, uncertain of their place in this established sanctuary, while the original inhabitants eyed them with a mixture of curiosity and cautious optimism. Deborah pushed through the crowd as soon as she spotted Brandon, rushing into his arms with such force that he staggered back a step. He held her tightly, the relief of their reunion evident in both their faces. "Told you I'd be right back," he said softly. "Next time I'm coming with you," she replied, only half joking. Nearby, George approached Aiden, extending his hand somewhat formally. "You actually did it," he said, a note of apology in his voice for having doubted the rescue plan. "You saved us all." "Wasn't just me," Aiden deflected, though he accepted the handshake with a nod of acknowledgement. Pamela joined them, her usual composed demeanor softened by genuine gratitude. "Thank you," she said simply, the words carrying more weight than any elaborate speech could have. At the front of the room, Gabe cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. His expression betrayed a hint of anxiety at the sudden population increase, his eyes darting around as if mentally recalculating supplies and space. "Well," he began somewhat awkwardly, "on behalf of everyone here, I'd like to welcome our new guests." He stumbled slightly over the last word, as if uncertain whether to say residents or refugees. Sensing Gabe's unease, Brandon stepped forward. "Thank you for taking us in," he said, addressing not just Gabe but everyone from the theme park. "I want to assure you all that we're here to help, not just take up resources. We've got students with various skills, engineering, medical, agricultural, and we're ready to pitch in wherever needed." This seemed to ease some of the tension in the room. Brandon motioned for Professor Lewis to join him, introducing her to the group. "This is Professor Lewis from the biology department. She's an expert in plant sciences, among other things." Lewis stepped forward, examining the canvas bags of seeds that had been placed on a central table. "You've gathered quite a good foundation here," she observed, sorting through the packets with professional interest. "With proper planning, we should be able to establish sustainable crops before the first frost." She looked up, her enthusiasm evident. "I'd like to get started right away if possible." "I can show you the areas we've been considering for planting," Emma offered. Lewis nodded appreciatively, then pointed to several students in the crowd. "Cole, Julia, and anyone else with agricultural or botanical experience, I could use your assistance." A few of the theme park residents volunteered as well, eager to be part of this hopeful new venture. As the impromptu farming team prepared to depart, Wesley called out from the back of the room, "Dinner's at 6. We'll sound the train horn to let everyone know." The meeting began to disperse, people breaking into smaller groups, the theme park residents taking newcomers under their wing to show them around their new home. Gabe, Brandon, and James moved to a quieter corner of the saloon, speaking in lowered voices. "This is a lot of new people, James," Gabe said, his concern evident. "I'm not saying we shouldn't help them, but our supplies will last longer with more hands helping to grow food," James interjected gently. "Brandon's right, these people bring skills we need." Brandon nodded. "We'll pull our weight, I promise. But James is hitting on something important. We need to start thinking about reinforcing the perimeter." Gabe's brow furrowed. "Why? It's held up fine so far." "We met a farmer while we were out," James explained. He mentioned encounters with another group, a hostile group looking to take what they could by force. He paused, letting the implication sink in. People are getting desperate out there. Sooner or later, someone's going to discover this place, and a refuge like this would be an ideal target. Gabe's expression grew more serious as he considered this. "You might be right. We've got a couple of engineering students in our group," Brandon added. "They'd be happy to help design improvements." After a moment's consideration, Gabe nodded. "Let's do it. With the additional people, We could step up patrols too, keep better watch on our surroundings." Their discussion concluded, Brandon and James stepped outside, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across Main Street. Deborah joined them, slipping her hand into Brandon's as they watched the activity unfolding around them. New arrivals were being shown to buildings where they could set up living spaces, while others had already joined work parties, eager to contribute to their new community. "It's like a little town," Deborah observed, a hint of wonder in her voice. "That's exactly what it is now," James replied, surveying the scene with satisfaction. "Or what it's becoming anyway." Brandon squeezed Deborah's hand, feeling for the first time in weeks a sense of genuine hope for the future. The world outside the fence was still broken, still dangerous, but here, within these walls, something new was taking root, a community forged from the ruins of the old world. James turned to them, a slight smile softening his usually serious expression. "Welcome to your new home." The end.